The moment Maggie Lane's fingers reached for the buttons of her dress, Jack Hollander's weathered hands began to shake. Not from desire, but from the loaded gun pressed against her spine by Elias Kane. "Do it slow, widow," Kane hissed, his breath reeking of whiskey and violence. "Let your new friend here watch what happens to those who defy me." In that smoke-filled saloon in Red Rock Gulch, with 20 outlaws surrounding them, Jack whispered a prayer he hadn't spoken since the war. "God help me." If you're watching from Dallas, Denver, or anywhere between, stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. The prairie wind carried dust and ghosts across the Nebraska territory that autumn of 1876, swirling through the wheels of Jack Hollander's worn wagon as he approached Red Rock Gulch. He hadn't planned to stop here, hadn't planned to stop anywhere, really. Men like him, men who'd seen too much blood soak into Virginia soil, men who'd watched brothers turn to corpses in fields of wheat, they didn't stop. They drifted. Jack's mare, Delilah, snorted her disapproval as they descended the rocky trail into town. Her hooves clicked against loose stones, echoing like distant gunfire, a sound that still made Jack's shoulders tense after all these years. The leather reins felt rough against his calloused palms, each line and scar a memory he'd rather forget. "Easy, girl," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if he was calming the horse or himself. The town spread before them like a wound in the earth. Wooden buildings clustered around a main street that turned to mud when it rained and dust when it didn't. Smoke rose from chimneys despite the afternoon heat, and somewhere a dog barked at shadows. Red Rock Gulch wasn't much to look at, but then again, neither was Jack anymore. At 34, his face bore the weathering of a man who'd lived twice that long. Deep lines creased the corners of his gray eyes, eyes that had once sparkled with youth's ambition but now held only wariness. His dark hair, touched with premature silver at the temples, hung past his collar, unkempt from weeks on the trail. The beard he'd grown to hide the scar running from his left ear to his jaw had turned wild, making him look more outlaw than the ex-soldier he was. He guided Delilah down Main Street, past the general store where two women in calico dresses whispered behind their hands, past the smithy where the hammer's ring matched his heartbeat, past the sheriff's office where no one stood guard. That should have been his first warning. A town this size, this far from civilization, with no lawman in sight. But Jack was tired, bone-deep tired, and all he wanted was a bed that didn't move with the wind. The Sunset boarding house stood at the street's end, 2 stories of weathered wood that had once been painted white, but now showed more gray than anything else. A hand-painted sign swung from rusty chains, creaking a lonesome tune. Jack tied Delilah to the hitching post, noticed how her ears swiveled nervously, noticed how quiet the street had become. The front door opened before he could knock. "You looking for a room?" The woman in the doorway couldn't have been more than 28, though something in her green eyes suggested she'd lived through her own share of sorrows. Margaret Lane, though everyone called her Maggie, stood straight-backed despite her small stature, auburn hair pinned up in a style that spoke of Eastern manners trying to survive Western realities. Her dress, deep blue cotton with small white flowers, had been mended at least twice that Jack could see, but it was clean and pressed with the kind of care that spoke of pride refusing to surrender to circumstance. "Yes, ma'am," Jack said, removing his hat. "If you've got one available." She studied him with an intensity that made him want to shuffle his feet like a schoolboy. Her gaze took in his travel-worn clothes, the Colt .45 holstered at his hip, the weariness that clung to him like trail dust. Most folks looked away when they saw that particular combination, drifter, armed, haunted. But Maggie Lane held his stare. $2 a week, includes breakfast and supper, no whiskey in the rooms, no visitors after 9, and you clean your boots before coming inside. Her voice carried a hint of Virginia accent, softened but not erased by frontier living. "Those terms acceptable?" "More than fair, ma'am." She stepped aside to let him enter, and Jack caught a whiff of lavender soap and something else, bread maybe, or pie. The smell of home, of normalcy, of everything he'd been running from and toward for the past 8 years. The boarding house's interior surprised him. Despite the weathered exterior, inside was warm and welcoming. Quilts hung on the walls, their patterns bright against dark wood. A piano sat in the parlor, its surface polished to a shine that reflected the late afternoon light streaming through lace curtains. Everything spoke of a woman trying to maintain civilization's graces in a place that seemed determined to strip them away. "You can take the room at the top of the stairs, second door on the right," Maggie said, leading him up steps that creaked under his weight. "It faces east, so you'll get the morning sun." "Some folks don't like that, but it's perfect," Jack interrupted, then caught himself. "Sorry, ma'am. Didn't mean to cut you off." She glanced back at him, and for the first time, something that might have been a smile touched her lips. "You don't strike me as a man who apologizes often, Mr. Hollander, Jack Hollander." "Well, Mr. Hollander, supper's at 6. We're having beef stew tonight, though calling it beef might be generous. More likely it's whatever Mr. Patterson had that stopped moving long enough to butcher." This time Jack did smile, surprising himself. When was the last time he'd done that? Months? Years? "I've eaten worse, I assure you." She opened the door to his room, small but clean, with a brass bed, washstand, and window overlooking the street. "I imagine you have," she said quietly, and something in her tone made Jack look at her more carefully. That's when he saw it, the faint yellowing along her jawline, mostly hidden by powder, and the collar of her dress. A bruise, nearly healed but still visible to eyes trained to recognize violence's aftermath. She caught him looking and quickly turned away. 6 o'clock, Mr. Hollander. Don't be late." She left before he could respond, her footsteps quick on the stairs. Jack set his saddlebags on the bed and moved to the window. Below, 3 men on horseback had stopped outside the boarding house. They wore long coats despite the heat, and even from here Jack could see the guns on their hips. One of them, a giant of a man with a black beard that reached his chest, tilted his head up as if sensing Jack's gaze. Their eyes met across the distance, and Jack felt the familiar chill of recognition, not of the man himself, but of what he represented. Trouble. Violence. Everything Jack had ridden 1,000 miles to escape. The man smiled, teeth white against his dark beard, and tipped his hat mockingly before spurring his horse forward. The others followed, and within moments the street was quiet again except for the wind and that creaking sign. Jack unpacked slowly, placing his few possessions in the dresser: 2 shirts, an extra pair of pants, a Bible he hadn't opened in 3 years, and a photograph wrapped in oilcloth that he didn't look at but couldn't throw away. His guns, the Colt at his hip and the Winchester he'd left with his saddle, were cleaned and loaded, habits that died harder than the men who'd taught them to him. By the time 6 o'clock came, Jack had washed the trail dust from his face and hands, beaten what dirt he could from his clothes, and tried to tame his wild hair into something resembling respectability. The dining room held 4 other boarders, an elderly couple heading further west, a traveling salesman with nervous eyes, and a young man who might have been a clerk or teacher. Maggie served the stew herself, moving between the tables with practiced efficiency. She'd changed into a different dress, this one brown with tiny pearl buttons, and Jack noticed she'd adjusted her hair to better hide the bruise. "This is quite good, Mrs. Lane," the salesman said, though his tone suggested surprise rather than genuine compliment. "Thank you, Mr. Foster." Her voice remained steady, polite, but distant. Jack ate in silence, listening to the others make small talk about the weather, the price of grain, the rumors of Indian troubles further north. Normal conversation for normal people living normal lives. He envied them. "You're new in town." It wasn't a question. The young man, introduced as Thomas Garrett, the town's new schoolteacher, was looking at Jack with the kind of curiosity that got men killed in certain circles. "Just passing through," Jack replied. "Most folks who pass through don't stop at Maggie's," the elderly man, Mr. Carlyle, observed. "They stay at the saloon or camp outside town. Maggie's is for folks planning to stay a while." "Henry," his wife chided gently, "don't pry." But the damage was done. Everyone was looking at Jack now, trying to puzzle out who he was, why he was here, what he was running from or toward. He'd gotten used to the scrutiny over the years, developed a way of deflecting it without seeming rude. "Sometimes the man just needs a clean bed and a good meal," he said. "Mrs. Lane provides both." Maggie had paused in clearing plates, and their eyes met across the room. Something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or recognition of a kindred spirit. She nodded almost imperceptibly and continued her work. After supper, Jack stepped onto the front porch for a smoke, though he didn't actually smoke anymore. It was just an excuse to be outside, to feel the cooling air and watch the town settle into evening. The saloon 2 blocks down was getting lively, piano music and laughter drifting on the breeze. Somewhere a baby cried, quickly soothed. Normal sounds of normal life. "Mr. Hollander?" Maggie stood in the doorway, backlit by the lamp from inside. She'd thrown a shawl around her shoulders, and in the dying light, she looked younger, more vulnerable. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you." Jack frowned. "For what?" "For not asking." She stepped onto the porch, careful to maintain proper distance. "Most men would have. About." She gestured vaguely toward her jaw. "Not my business, ma'am." "No," she agreed. "It's not. But that doesn't usually stop people." She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the darkening street. "My husband died 6 months ago. Everyone thinks that should have ended my troubles. But it didn't." It wasn't a question, and she didn't treat it as one. "Some debts don't die with the debtor, Mr. Hollander. Some mistakes echo long after the man who made them is in the ground." Jack wanted to ask more, wanted to offer help he had no business offering, wanted to do something about the resignation in her voice. But he'd learned long ago that wanting to help and being able to help were often very different things. "Those men who rode by earlier," he said instead, "they trouble you?" She stiffened. "You saw them?" "Hard to miss. The one with the black beard seemed particularly interested in your establishment. Elias Kane." She spoke the name like a curse. "He and my husband were business associates. My late husband owed him money, a considerable sum." "And Kane expects you to pay it?" "One way or another." The implications in those 4 words made Jack's jaw clench. The law. "Sheriff Morrison left town 2 weeks ago. Said he was going to Denver on business. Haven't seen him since." She pulled the shawl tighter. "The deputy, young Sam Peters, is a good boy, but he's just that, a boy. 19 years old and scared of his own shadow, much less Elias Kane. And Kane knows this. Kane arranged it." She turned to go inside, then paused. "I'm telling you this as a warning, Mr. Hollander. Not a request for help. You seem like a decent man, and decent men have a bad habit of dying in Red Rock Gulch. Keep your head down, stay out of Kane's way, and move on as soon as you can. That's the only advice worth giving around here." She disappeared inside before Jack could respond. He stood on the porch a while longer, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. He should leave. Tonight. Pack his things, saddle Delilah, and ride out before he got tangled in something that wasn't his fight. But when he finally went inside, it was to his room, not the stable. He told himself it was because he'd paid for a week and wasted money bothered him. He told himself it was because Delilah needed rest. He told himself a lot of things that night, lying in that brass bed, listening to the boarding house settle around him. The truth was simpler and more complicated all at once. For the first time in 8 years, someone had looked at him and seen a decent man, not a killer, not a soldier, not a drifter. Maggie Lane had looked at him and seen someone worth warning, worth protecting from the violence that circled her life like wolves. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had tried to protect him from anything. Sleep came fitfully, broken by dreams of Virginia fields and the faces of men he'd killed, men he'd failed to save, men who'd died believing in causes that seemed meaningless now. He woke just before dawn, as was his habit, and lay listening to the house come alive around him. Footsteps in the hall, probably Mr. Carlyle, who'd mentioned being an early riser, the clatter of pans from the kitchen below, the soft humming of a woman's voice, Maggie, preparing breakfast. Jack dressed quietly and made his way downstairs. The other boarders weren't up yet, and he found Maggie alone in the kitchen, kneading dough for the day's bread. She'd pinned her hair up tightly, all business, but a few strands had escaped to frame her face. The bruise was darker this morning, or maybe it was just the early light making it more visible. "You're up early," she said without turning around. "Coffee's on the stove." Jack poured himself a cup, the bitter warmth welcome after the restless night. "Can I help?" She did turn then, flour dusting her hands. "You know how to cook?" "I know how to not starve. That's about the extent of it. That almost smile touched her lips again. Well, you can fetch more wood for the stove if you're looking to be useful. Piles out back. It was such a normal request, such a simple domestic task, that Jack found himself oddly grateful for it. He spent the next half hour hauling wood, stacking it neatly by the kitchen door, working up the kind of honest sweat that had nothing to do with fear or fighting. When he came back in with the last armload, Maggie had set out a plate for him. Eggs, bacon, biscuits with butter and honey. You've earned a proper breakfast, she said. The others get porridge. Your secret's safe with me. They ate in companionable silence, the kitchen warm with steam from the stove and golden with early morning light. It was the kind of moment Jack had forgotten existed. Peaceful, simple, human. No one was dying, no one was shooting, no one was screaming orders or prayers or last words. You were a soldier. Again, not a question. How'd you know? The way you move. The way you check exits when you enter a room. The way you cleaned your plate just now, like you're not sure when the next meal might come. She sipped her coffee. My father was career military. I grew up on army posts from Missouri to California. What brought you here? Love? The word came out bitter. Or what I thought was love. Richard Lane swept me off my feet at a dance in Kansas City, promised me adventure, prosperity, a life of excitement out west. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. He delivered on the excitement, I suppose. Just not the kind I'd imagined. How long were you married? 4 years, 4 very long years. She stood, began clearing the dishes. He wasn't a bad man at first. Or maybe he was, and I was too young and foolish to see it. The drinking came gradually, then the gambling, the debts, the violence. Jack wanted to say something comforting, but what comfort could he offer? He knew better than most that some wounds never healed, just scarred over. I'm sorry, he said finally, because it was true even if it was inadequate. Don't be. I made my choices. Now I live with them. She paused at the sink, her back to him. What about you, Mr. Hollander? What choices are you living with? The question hung between them like smoke. Jack could lie, could deflect, could maintain the carefully constructed distance he kept from everyone. But something about this woman, this kitchen, this morning made him want to tell the truth, or at least part of it. I was at Antietam, he said quietly. Sharpsburg, they called it in the South. Bloodiest single day in the whole damned war. Over 20,000 casualties in 12 hours. He stared into his coffee cup like it might hold absolution. I was a lieutenant then. Had 30 men under my command when the day started. By sunset, I had 6. Maggie had turned from the sink, was watching him with those green eyes that seemed to see too much. The things we did that day, the things I ordered my men to do. He trailed off, lost in memory. There was this cornfield, Miller's cornfield. We charged through it 3 times, lost it twice. By the end, the stalks were cut down by bullets and cannonballs, and you couldn't take a step without... He stopped, aware he'd said too much. Without stepping on the dead, Maggie finished softly. Jack looked up sharply, but there was no judgment in her face, only understanding. My father was at Chancellorsville, she said. He came home different, quieter. He'd sit for hours just staring at nothing, and sometimes he'd cry out in his sleep. Mother said he was sick, but I knew better. You can't see things like that, do things like that, and remain who you were. No, Jack agreed. You can't. The kitchen door burst open, shattering the moment. Thomas Garrett stumbled in, his young face pale with fear. Mrs. Lane! They're here! Kane and his men, they're... The sound of breaking glass from the front parlor cut him off. Then came laughter, rough and mean, and the heavy tread of boots on floorboards. Stay here, Jack told Maggie, but she was already moving toward the door. This is my house. He caught her arm, gentle but firm. And you've got boarders to think about. Get them out the back if things go bad. She wanted to argue, he could see it in her eyes, but practicality won. She nodded, gathered Thomas, and headed for the stairs to wake the others. Jack walked into the parlor to find 5 men making themselves at home. They'd pushed over a bookshelf, scattered its contents across the floor. One was playing chopsticks on the piano with the butt of his pistol. Another had his muddy boots up on Maggie's good sofa. and in the center, like a dark sun around which the others orbited, stood Elias Kane. He was bigger up close, maybe 6'4", with shoulders that strained his black coat. His beard was indeed black as coal, but streaked with premature gray that made him look older than his probable 40 years. His eyes were what held Jack's attention, though, pale blue, almost white, like winter ice. Killer's eyes. "Well, well," Kane said, his voice a low rumble. "The widow has a new friend." "Just a boarder," Jack replied, keeping his own voice level. "Here on business." "Is that so?" Kane moved closer, and Jack caught the smell of him. Whiskey, tobacco, and something else. Something rank like meat left too long in the sun. "And what business might that be?" "My own." Kane smiled, revealing those white teeth. "Everything in Red Rock Gulch is my business, friend. Every transaction, every conversation, every breath taken in this town happens because I allow it." One of his men snickered. Jack memorized the man's face. Thin, pockmarked, with a lazy eye. In his experience, the ones who laughed were usually the first to break when things got serious. "Seems like a lot of work for one man," Jack observed. "Oh, I've got help." Kane gestured to his men. "These boys here, they're like family to me. We look after each other, and we look after the town's interests. By breaking into people's homes?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Kane's smile faded. "Now that's an unfriendly way to put it. I'm here on a matter of business with Mrs. Lane, a debt that needs settling. Her husband's debt died with him." "Did it now?" Kane pulled a piece of paper from his coat. "See, I've got here a promissory note. Signed by Richard Lane, witnessed and notarized all proper like. Says he owes me $15,000 to be paid in full by September 1st. That was 2 weeks ago. Which means interest is accruing daily." Kane's smile returned, cold as his eyes. "By my calculation, the widow now owes me $16,500, unless she'd prefer to settle the debt other ways." Jack felt his hand drift toward his gun, an unconscious movement that Kane's men noticed immediately. Hands moved to weapons, the atmosphere crackling with potential violence. Now," Kane said, raising a hand to calm his men. "No need for unpleasantness. I'm a reasonable man. I've offered Mrs. Lane several options for settling her account. She could sell this establishment. I'd give her a fair price, enough to cover the debt with maybe a little left over for traveling money. This is her home, or was her husband's home, technically, and before that belonged to a Mr. Samuel Morrison. Funny thing, him disappearing so sudden-like after selling to Richard Lane, almost like he knew something bad was coming." Kane examined his fingernails with theatrical casualness. "Or there's always the other option. Mrs. Lane is still a handsome woman, despite her recent difficulties. I'm sure we could work out an arrangement that would be mutually beneficial." The rage that flooded Jack was familiar, almost welcome. It was the same feeling he'd had at Antietam when he'd seen Confederate soldiers bayoneting wounded Union men. The same feeling when he'd found those murdered families along the Kansas border. It was the kind of rage that had made him very good at killing once upon a time. "Get out." His voice came out low, dangerous. Kane raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." "You heard me. Get out of this house. Now." "Or what?" Kane stepped closer, close enough that Jack could see the old acne scars beneath his beard. "You'll make me? You and what army, soldier boy?" So Kane had recognized him too, not personally, but as a type. Former military men had a way of standing, of moving, that was hard to disguise. "Don't need an army," Jack said. "Just need one bullet. Maybe two if your aim's off, but mine isn't." The room went very still. Jack could hear Maggie on the stairs, trying to quietly evacuate the other boarders. Could hear the wind through the broken window. Could hear his own heartbeat, steady as a drum. Kane studied him for a long moment. Then he laughed, a booming sound that filled the room. "I like you," he declared. "You've got sand. I'll give you that. Tell you what, soldier boy, I'll give the widow another week to consider my generous offers. But you," he pointed a thick finger at Jack, "you, I'm going to be watching. This isn't your fight, and if you're smart, you'll keep it that way." He turned to leave, his men falling in behind him. At the door, he paused. "Oh, and Mrs. Lane?" he called out, knowing she was listening. "You might want to reconsider your choice in boarders. The last man who stood up to me is feeding worms in the cemetery. Of course, that was your husband, so maybe you already knew that." They left, boots thundering on the porch, horses whinnying as they mounted up. Jack stood in the wreckage of the parlor, fists clenched, until the sound of hoofbeats faded. Maggie appeared in the doorway, pale but composed. "You shouldn't have done that. Someone needed to." "No," she said firmly. "No one needed to. I've survived 6 months of Elias Kane. I would have survived this too." "By doing what? Selling your home? Becoming his—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "By surviving," she said simply. "That's what women like me do, Mr. Hollander. We survive. We endure. We don't have the luxury of grand gestures and noble stands. You shouldn't have to just survive." She laughed, bitter and tired. "Shouldn't? There's a word that has no meaning out here. I shouldn't have married Richard. He shouldn't have gambled away everything we had. He shouldn't have borrowed money from outlaws. But he did, and I did, and here we are." She began picking up books from the floor, her movements sharp, angry. Jack bent to help, but she waved him off. "Don't. You've done enough. Maggie, Mrs. Lane." She straightened, clutching an armful of books. "We're not friends, Mr. Hollander. You're a boarder. I'm a proprietress, that's all. And after what just happened, you should probably find other accommodations." "I'm not leaving." "Yes, you are. If not today, then soon. Men like you always leave. It's what you do. You drift into town, cause trouble with your principles and your pride, and then you drift out again, leaving the rest of us to clean up the mess." Her words hit harder than any bullet could have. Because she was right, wasn't she? That's exactly what he was. What he'd been doing for 8 years. Drifting, interfering, leaving. "Maybe," he admitted, "but not today." She stared at him, and he saw something shift in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or hope quickly suppressed. "Then you're a fool. Been called worse." The other boarders were creeping back in, the Carlyles clutching each other, Foster the salesman white as a sheet. Thomas Garrett tried to help with the cleanup, but his hand shook so badly he nearly dropped the lamp he picked up. "It's all right," Maggie told them, the hostess mask sliding back into place. "Just a misunderstanding. Everything's fine now." But her eyes, when they met Jack's across the room, said otherwise. Everything was very much not fine, and they both knew it. Kane would be back, and next time, he might not be in such a generous mood. The rest of the day passed in tense normalcy. The parlor was clean, the window boarded up until glass could be ordered from Denver. The other boarders whispered among themselves but said nothing directly. Meals were served, dishes were washed, life continued its rhythm because what else was there to do? But Jack noticed things, how Maggie jumped at every sound from the street, how she kept a kitchen knife within reach at all times, how she stood at windows, watching, waiting, expecting the worst. That evening, after the others had retired, Jack found her on the back porch, staring out at the darkening prairie. She'd let her hair down, and it caught the last of the sunset, turning to copper and gold. "I owe you an apology," she said without turning. "What I said earlier about men like you, it was cruel. It was honest. The two aren't mutually exclusive." She sighed. "Why did you stand up to him?" "Really?" Jack considered lying, considered giving her some noble reason she could dismiss, but she deserved truth. "Because I've been running for 8 years, he said. "From the war, from what I did in it, from what it made me. And I'm tired of running." "So you decided to make your stand here, in Red Rock Gulch? Over me?" "I've made stands in worse places for worse reasons." She turned to face him then, and in the dying light he could see tears she refused to let fall. "This won't end well," she said. "Kane doesn't forgive and he doesn't forget. He'll come back with more men, and then we'll be ready." "We?" She shook her head. "There is no we, Mr. Hollander. There's you, a drifter with a death wish. And me? A widow with debts I can't pay." "There could be." The words hung between them, loaded with more meaning than Jack had intended. Maggie's eyes widened slightly, and color rose in her cheeks. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I know enough." "No, you don't. You don't know that I was relieved when Richard died. You don't know that I stood over his body as he bled out from that knife wound and felt nothing but freedom. You don't know that sometimes I wonder if I'm the reason Cain killed him, if he saw something in me that made him think I'd be easier to control as a widow than as a wife." "Did you kill your husband?" "No." The word came quick, firm. "But I didn't save him either. When Cain's men came that night, when the fight started, I could have warned Richard about the man behind the door. I saw him, saw the knife, and I said nothing." Jack stepped closer, close enough to smell that lavender soap again. "That doesn't make you a bad person. Doesn't make me a good one either." "Good people don't survive out here," Jack said. "Strong people do. Smart people do. You're both." She laughed, watery and weak. "If I was smart, I'd take Cain's offer. Sell the boarding house, take what money he gives me, and start over somewhere else." "Why don't you?" She was quiet for so long Jack thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "Because this is the first thing that's ever been mine. Not my father's, not my husband's, mine. I've put everything I have into this place, made it a home for people who need one. And maybe that's foolish, maybe it's prideful, but I'd rather die defending it than live knowing I gave it up without a fight." "Then we fight. You keep saying we." "I keep meaning it." She searched his face in the gathering darkness. "Why? What's in it for you?" Jack thought about the men he'd led to their deaths, the orders he'd followed that resulted in massacres, the choices he'd made that haunted his dreams. He thought about 8 years of drifting, of running, of trying to outpace his ghosts. "Redemption, maybe," he said, "or at least the chance at it." "I'm not your redemption, Jack Hollander." "No," he agreed. "But fighting for you, for this place, for something that matters, that might be—" She stepped back, wrapped her arms around herself. "Cain will kill you. He'll try. You can't face him alone. Don't plan to." She frowned. "Who else would stand with you? The Carlyles are too old. Foster would run at the first shot. And Thomas—" She shook her head. "He's just a boy." "There are others in town. People who are tired of Cain, who just need someone to show them it's possible to fight back. You don't know this town. Fear runs deeper than the wells here. Cain's made examples of anyone who opposes him. Fear's like a dam," Jack said. "Holds for a long time, but when it breaks all at once." Maggie studied him for a long moment. "You really mean to do this? To stay and fight? Unless you throw me out?" "I should. Any sensible woman would. But you won't." "No," she admitted. "God help me, I won't." She moved toward the door, paused. "There's something you should know. The barn out back? The one I told the other boarders was damaged in a storm? Cain's men use it to store things. Stolen cattle, weapons, sometimes people they're moving against their will." Jack's jaw tightened. "You knew?" "Richard knew. He was part of it, getting paid to look the other way, to provide cover. After he died, Cain just kept using it. What was I supposed to do? Say no? We're going to have to do something about that. We, again. I'm consistent if nothing else." That almost smile appeared one more time. Consistently foolish, maybe. She opened the door, lamplight spilling out. "Good night, Mr. Hollander. Try not to get yourself killed before breakfast." She disappeared inside, leaving Jack alone with the stars and his thoughts. He stayed on the porch a while longer, planning, considering options and outcomes. The smart thing would still be to leave, to saddle up and ride out before things got worse. But he'd been doing the smart thing for 8 years. And where had it gotten him? Nowhere, with nothing but regrets and ghosts for company. Inside the boarding house, he could hear Maggie moving about, preparing for bed. Such ordinary sounds for such an extraordinary woman. She didn't see herself that way. He knew. She saw herself as trapped, possibly complicit, certainly compromised. But Jack saw something else. Strength disguised as submission, courage masquerading as mere stubbornness. He'd known soldiers who'd broken under less pressure than she faced daily. A sound from the barn caught his attention. Horses, several of them, and muffled voices. Kane's men, using the facility as Maggie had described. Jack's hand went to his gun, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. Information first, action second. That's what had kept him alive through the war and after. He moved silently across the yard, keeping to shadows. The barn doors were slightly open, lamplight leaking out. Jack positioned himself where he could see without being seen. 5 men inside, none of them Kane. They were loading crates onto a wagon, working quickly but quietly. Jack recognized 2 from the morning's confrontation, the one with the lazy eye and another with a scar across his throat. "Don't see why we're doing this in the dark," Lazy Eye complained. "Kane owns this town." "Kane's smart enough to know that ownership can change," Throat Scar replied, his voice raspy like he'd been hanged and survived it. "Sheriff from Denver's been asking questions. Better to move the goods now." "What about the woman?" "What about her?" "Boss seems mighty interested. More than just the money, if you ask me." Throat Scar laughed, an ugly sound. "Course he is. You seen her? Even with that pride of hers, she's a fine-looking woman. Kane likes breaking the proud ones." "What about the new boarder?" "What about him?" "One man against all of us? He'll learn or he'll die. Simple as that." They continued loading, discussing routes and buyers, giving Jack valuable intelligence with every word. These weren't just local thugs. They were part of something bigger, a network that stretched beyond Red Rock Gulch. He was so focused on listening that he almost missed the footsteps behind him. Jack spun, hand going to his gun, to find Thomas Garrett frozen with fear, hands raised. "Don't shoot," the young teacher whispered. "It's just me." Jack grabbed him, pulled him into the shadows. "What the hell are you doing out here?" "I saw you from my window. Thought you might need help." "Help?" Jack had to fight not to laugh. "Boy, you nearly wet yourself when Kane showed up this morning." Thomas flushed, but didn't deny it. "I was scared." "I'm still scared, but Mrs. Lane's been kind to me, and someone needs to stand with her." Jack studied the young man, really looked at him for the first time. Maybe 22, 23, with the soft look of someone who'd grown up with books instead of guns. But there was something in his eyes, a determination that reminded Jack of young recruits he'd trained, boys who'd become men in the crucible of war. "You know how to shoot." "I can learn." "Can you keep your mouth shut about what you see and hear?" "Yes." Jack considered for a moment, then nodded toward the barn. "They're moving stolen goods. Part of a larger operation that Kane's running. This is bigger than just Mrs. Lane's debt." Thomas peered through the darkness. "Should we tell someone? The federal marshals, maybe? With what proof? And how long before word got back to Kane?" Jack shook his head. "No, we handle this ourselves." "We?" Jack almost smiled. Everyone wanted to know about we tonight. "You want to help Mrs. Lane?" "Really help her?" "Yes." "Then here's what you're going to do." He outlined a simple plan. Thomas would document everything: dates, times, descriptions, build a case that could be presented to federal authorities when the time was right. Meanwhile, he'd start feeling out others in town, finding out who might stand against Kane if given the chance and the leadership. "Can you do that?" Thomas nodded, trying to look braver than he was. "What about you?" "I'm going to give Kane something else to think about." They separated, Thomas heading back to the boarding house while Jack continued to watch the barn. The men finished loading and drove off into the night, leaving one man behind to guard whatever remained. Jack memorized the guard's routine, how often he checked outside, where he positioned himself when he dozed. By the time Jack returned to his room, it was well past midnight. He lay in bed, fully clothed, guns within reach, and thought about the war he'd just volunteered for. It was smaller than the last one, more personal, but wars were all the same in the end. They came down to who was willing to sacrifice more, endure more, lose more. The difference was, this time he had something worth fighting for. Not a cause or a principle or someone else's idea of right and wrong. This time he had a woman with green eyes and quiet strength, a boarding house that represented everything home meant, and a chance to be something more than a ghost drifting through other people's lives. Whether that was enough remained to be seen. But for the first night in 8 years, Jack Hollander fell asleep without dreaming of dead men in cornfields. Instead, he dreamed of auburn hair and lamplight and the possibility of redemption found in the unlikeliest of places, a boarding house at the end of a dusty street in a town that had forgotten what it meant to hope. The next morning would bring new challenges, new confrontations. Kane wouldn't stay away long, and when he returned, it would be with greater force and less patience. But that was tomorrow's war. Tonight, Jack had chosen his ground, found his cause, and for the first time since Antietam, he had something he was willing to die for. More importantly, he had something he was willing to live for. And that, he thought, as sleep finally claimed him, made all the difference. The dawn came too soon, bringing with it the acrid smell of smoke. Jack bolted upright, instantly alert, his hand already on the Colt before his eyes were fully open. Through the window, he could see orange flames licking at the sky from the direction of the schoolhouse. He was pulling on his boots when he heard Maggie's door slam open down the hall, her footsteps quick on the stairs. By the time Jack reached the street, half the town was already forming a bucket brigade. Thomas Garrett stood at the front, his face streaked with soot and tears as he watched his classroom burn. The young teacher had lost everything: his books, his carefully prepared lessons, the maps he'd bought with his own meager salary. But it was the message that hurt more than the loss. Jack could see it in the boy's eyes. This was Kane's response to last night, to Thomas being seen with Jack near the barn. "My books," Thomas kept saying, his voice hollow. "All my books." Maggie appeared at Jack's elbow, her face grim. She'd thrown a shawl over her nightdress, and her hair hung loose down her back. Even in the chaos, several men noticed, their eyes lingering until Jack's cold stare drove them back to their buckets. "This is because of us," she said quietly. "Because of what happened yesterday." "This is because Kane's a bastard who likes hurting people," Jack corrected. "Would have happened eventually anyway." But they both knew that wasn't entirely true. The timing was too precise, the target too specific. Kane was sending a message, and everyone in Red Rock Gulch was receiving it loud and clear. Stand with the widow and her boarder, and burn. The fire was finally controlled by mid-morning, leaving only a blackened skeleton where the schoolhouse had stood. The children who'd gathered watched with wide eyes as their teacher picked through the ruins, salvaging what little remained. A half-burned primer here, a warped slate there, pitiful remnants of what had been the town's one claim to civilization. "We'll rebuild," Mayor Patterson said, though his voice lacked conviction. He was a thin man with a thick mustache that seemed to weigh down his entire face. "The town council will meet, discuss funds." "The town council will do nothing," Jack interrupted, loud enough for the gathered crowd to hear. "Just like you did nothing when Sheriff Morrison disappeared. Just like you do nothing every time Kane rides through town like he owns it." Patterson's face reddened. "Now see here, Mr. Hollander. And I am seeing, Mayor. I'm seeing a town that's given up. A town that lets outlaws burn schools and threaten women and nobody does a damn thing about it. What would you have us do?" This from Dr. Brennan, the town's only physician, an elderly man with trembling hands. "Kane has 20 men, maybe more. We're shopkeepers and farmers." "You're men, aren't you?" Jack let his gaze sweep the crowd. "Or at least you used to be. Every one of you came out here for something: land, opportunity, freedom. Now you cower in your shops and homes while Kane takes whatever he wants." "Easy for you to say," someone called out. "You're just passing through. We have to live here." "No," Jack said. "You're choosing to exist here. Living is something different." He saw his words hit home with some, saw the shame and anger flash across faces before being suppressed. But fear was stronger than shame for most of them. Fear had deep roots in Red Rock Gulch. "Big talk from a drifter," a new voice said, and the crowd parted to reveal Kane himself, flanked by 6 of his men. He sat his horse like a king surveying his kingdom, that black beard catching the late morning sun. "But talk is cheap, Mr. Hollander. Action. Now that costs." Kane dismounted with surprising grace for such a large man, his spurs ringing against the packed earth. His men spread out, hands casual but ready on their weapons. Jack noticed how the townspeople stepped back, creating a circle with him and Kane at its center. Even Maggie moved away, though her eyes never left Jack's face. "Shame about the school," Kane continued, his voice carrying that false sympathy that made Jack's teeth clench. "These old buildings, dry wood, Single spark can take the whole thing. Tragic, really. You son of a bitch. Thomas started forward, but one of Kane's men, the one with the lazy eye, backhanded him casually, sending the teacher sprawling in the dirt. Jack took a step toward Lazy Eye, but Kane raised a hand. Now, now. No need for unpleasantness. The boy's upset, understandable given the circumstances. Tell you what, Patterson, he turned to the mayor, I'll donate $500 to the school rebuilding fund. How's that for civic responsibility? Patterson stammered something that might have been thanks. Others in the crowd murmured, confused by the gesture. But Jack saw the game. Burn it down, then pay to rebuild it, keeping everyone off balance, never sure whether Kane was savior or devil. There's just one condition, Kane added, because there was always a condition. Mr. Hollander here needs to move on, today. He's disturbing the peace, stirring up trouble where there doesn't need to be any. I'm not going anywhere, Jack said. Kane's pale eyes fixed on him. That's unfortunate. See, I'm trying to be reasonable here, trying to avoid bloodshed. But if you insist on staying, he shrugged, the gesture eloquent in its implications. Then what? You'll burn down the boarding house next, kill me in my sleep? That your idea of being reasonable? I don't make threats, Mr. Hollander. I make promises. Kane stepped closer, close enough that Jack could smell the whiskey on his breath despite the early hour. Here's a promise for you. Stay in Red Rock Gulch, and things will get very unpleasant for everyone you care about. Jack's hand moved to his gun, but before he could draw, Maggie's voice cut through the tension. Mr. Hollander is my employee, she said, stepping forward despite the danger. I've hired him to help run the boarding house. He has every right to be here. Kane's attention shifted to her, and his smile turned predatory. Your employee? Well now, that changes things. Means you're responsible for his actions, Mrs. Lane. Sure you want that burden? I'm sure. Even knowing what it might cost? Maggie lifted her chin, and in that moment Jack saw the army officer's daughter she'd once been. I've already lost everything that mattered to me, Mr. Kane. What else can you take? Oh, you'd be surprised, Kane said softly, and something in his tone made Jack's blood run cold. You'd be very surprised. He turned back to Jack. Last chance, soldier boy. Right out now, and everyone stays healthy. Stay, and, well... He glanced at Thomas, still struggling to his feet, at Maggie standing defiant but alone, at the burned ruins of the school. You've seen what happens to things I don't like in this town. Go to hell, Jack said. Kane laughed, that booming sound that seemed to shake the very air. Been there, friend. Got bored. He mounted his horse in one smooth motion. You've got 24 hours to reconsider. After that, I stopped being polite. He spurred his horse, his men falling in behind him, leaving a cloud of dust and a crowd of frightened people in their wake. As soon as they were gone, the townspeople scattered like roaches when a lamp is lit, hurrying back to their shops and homes, wanting no part of what was coming. Only a few remained, Maggie, Thomas, Dr. Brennan, and surprisingly, the blacksmith, a massive man named Eric Johansson, who'd said nothing but watched everything with careful eyes. You've killed us all, Dr. Brennan said, his voice shaking. Kane never forgets an insult. Then maybe it's time we gave him something else to remember, Jack replied. Johansson spoke for the first time, his Swedish accent thick despite years in America. You cannot fight 20 men with speeches. No, Jack agreed, but I don't plan to fight them with speeches. Then, with what? Thomas asked, holding a handkerchief to his split lip. We have no sheriff, no organized militia, no... We have something better, Jack interrupted. We have desperation. There's not a person in this town who hasn't been hurt by Kane in some way. They just need to realize they've got nothing left to lose. You're talking about war, Dr. Brennan said. I'm talking about survival. Kane's already declared war. You just haven't been fighting back. Johansson studied Jack with those careful eyes. You have plan. The beginning of one. Jack looked at each of them in turn. But I need to know who's really with us. Not just standing here talking, but ready to act when the time comes. I'm in, Thomas said immediately, though his voice shook. They burned my school, my books, everything I came here to build. This is madness, Dr. Brennan muttered, but he didn't leave. I'm too old for fighting. Can you still treat wounds? Jack asked. Of course. Then you're valuable. What about you? He turned to Johansson. You've been quiet all this time, but you're still standing here. The blacksmith rolled his massive shoulders. Kane's men killed my dog. Said it barked too much. Was good dog. Loyal. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was harder than the iron he worked. I make horseshoes. Also make other things. Things that might be useful. Jack nodded, understanding. A blacksmith could make weapons, repair guns, create obstacles. Valuable indeed. We'll need more, Maggie said. A lot more. We'll get them. People are like kindling, just need the right spark. Jack turned to Thomas. You still have that list we talked about? People who might stand with us? Thomas nodded. But most of them are scared. After what happened to the school, they should be angry. We just need to remind them that fear and anger are two sides of the same coin, and one's a lot more useful than the other. They dispersed to spread the word quietly, carefully. Jack watched them go, then felt Maggie's hand on his arm. You're going to get yourself killed, she said. Maybe, but at least I'll die for something worthwhile. Is that supposed to comfort me? He turned to her, saw the fear and something else in her eyes. Maggie, don't. She pulled her hand away. Don't make this about me. Don't make me the cause you're dying for. Too late. She made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. You impossible man. You've known me 3 days. Sometimes 3 days is enough. To know someone, to know what matters. She searched his face and he let her see the truth there, that she did matter, more than he'd expected, more than was wise. But wisdom had never been his strong suit anyway. Tonight, she said finally. Come to the kitchen after the others are asleep. There are things you need to know about Kane, about my husband's dealings with him. Things that might help. She walked away before he could respond, her back straight despite the weight she carried. Jack watched her go, then turned his attention to the burned school. The message was clear, but messages could be answered, and Jack intended to send one of his own. That afternoon he paid a visit to the general store where Mr. Hutchins greeted him with nervous eyes and sweating palms. I don't want any trouble, Hutchins said immediately. I run a peaceful establishment. Peaceful, Jack repeated, looking around the well-stocked store. That's one word for it. How much does Kane charge you for protection? Hutchins went pale. I don't know what you mean. Sure you do. Every business in town pays him, don't they? Weekly? Monthly? Please, Mr. Hollander, I have a family. So did the Jeffersons, before Kane decided their farm was in his way. So did the Changs, before their restaurant mysteriously burned down. Your family's only safe as long as you're useful to Kane. What happens when you're not? Hutchins slumped against his counter. What do you want from me? Information. And when the time comes, ammunition. I can't. You can. You just have to decide whether you're more afraid of Kane or of spending the rest of your life as his slave. He left Hutchins to think about it and made similar visits throughout the town. The barber, the hotel owner, the woman who ran the laundry, planting seeds of rebellion, watering them with carefully chosen words. Some would grow, others wouldn't, but every revolution started with someone saying enough. As evening approached, Jack found himself at the cemetery on the hill overlooking the town. It wasn't large, maybe 50 graves all told, but a third of them were fresh, the earth still settling. He found Richard Lane's marker easily enough, a simple wooden cross with his name and dates. No loving husband, no missed by wife, just the bare facts of a life that ended badly. You here to pay respects to my husband? Jack turned to find Maggie behind him, carrying a small bouquet of prairie flowers, more like trying to understand him. She knelt by the grave, placed the flowers at the base of the cross. There's nothing to understand. He was weak, and his weakness killed him. Kane killed him. Kane pulled the trigger, but Richard loaded the gun long before that. She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. He thought he was so clever, playing Kane against the other ranchers, taking money from both sides. But you can't cheat the devil and expect to keep your soul. What exactly was he involved in? Everything. Cattle rustling, claim jumping, moving stolen goods through the territory. The boarding house was perfect cover. Travelers coming and going, no one questioning strangers or strange cargo. She laughed bitterly. I was so proud when he bought it, thought we were finally building something respectable. You didn't know? Not at first. Richard was good at keeping secrets, but wives always find out eventually, don't they? The late nights, the unexpected money, the fear in his eyes when certain names were mentioned. She turned from the grave, faced Jack directly. I confronted him about it once. That's when the hitting started. Jack's jaw tightened. How long? 2 years, give or take. Started with shoves, harsh words, escalated from there. The bruise you saw the other day? That was nothing compared to some. Why didn't you leave? And go where? With what money? My family disowned me when I married Richard. A frontier nobody, they called him. I had no skills beyond what I'd learned as an army daughter, and those don't exactly translate to employment opportunities for women. So you endured. I survived. There's a difference. She started walking back toward town, and Jack fell into step beside her. The night Richard died, Kane came to collect a debt. Richard had been skimming from the operation, thought Kane wouldn't notice. But Kane notices everything. What happened? They argued. Richard pulled a gun. Stupid, stupid man. Kane had 6 men with him. It was over in seconds. She paused, looking out over the town as shadows lengthened. Kane stood over Richard's body and looked at me. You're free now, he said, like he'd done me a favor, like I should be grateful. In his twisted way, maybe he thought he had. Oh, he knew exactly what he was doing. Removing Richard, leaving me vulnerable, in debt, alone. Kane's nothing if not strategic. She glanced at Jack. That's what you're up against. Not just violence, but intelligence. He's survived out here for 15 years because he's smart enough to know when to use the carrot and when to use the stick. Everyone makes mistakes. Not Kane, at least not until now. She stopped walking, turned to face him. You're his mistake, Jack. He should have killed you that first morning, the moment you stood up to him. But his ego wouldn't let him. He wanted to break you first, make an example. That pride, that's his weakness. You've thought about this. I've had 6 months to think about it, to plan, to imagine scenarios where someone, anyone, would stand up to him. She touched his arm lightly. I just never imagined it would be a drifter who'd known me 3 days. 4 now, Jack corrected, which earned him that almost smile he was beginning to cherish. They returned to the boarding house to find the other residents packing. The Carlyles were the first to announce their departure. We're sorry, Mrs. Lane, Mr. Carlyle said, his wife nodding beside him, but we're too old for this kind of trouble. We'll be leaving in the morning. Foster the salesman had already gone, slipping out while they were at the cemetery. Only Thomas remained, and he looked miserable. The mayor says I can sleep in the church until new accommodations are arranged, he said. He strongly suggested I not associate with rebellious elements. You don't have to go, Maggie said, but her voice lacked conviction. She knew as well as anyone that staying meant choosing a side in the coming fight. Yes, I do, Thomas replied. But that doesn't mean I'm abandoning you, or our cause. He looked at Jack. I'll keep working on that list. Carefully. After they'd gone and the house had settled into evening quiet, Jack helped Maggie clear the dining room. They worked in companionable silence, the domestic routine a strange counterpoint to the violence they both knew was coming. You should leave too, Maggie said as she washed dishes. Take your horse, ride out tonight while you can. We've had this conversation. That was before Kane burned the school, before he made his ultimatum public. The stakes are higher now. Jack took a plate from her, dried it carefully. The stakes were always high. We just couldn't see all the cards before. This isn't a game, Jack. No, he agreed. Games have rules. She handed him another plate, and their fingers brushed. Both froze for a moment, the touch electric in its simplicity. Then Maggie pulled away, focusing intently on the washing. There's something else, she said. Something I haven't told anyone. In Richard's office, I kept it locked after he died, there's a safe. I don't know the combination, but Richard once said it contained insurance. If Kane ever turns on us, he said. "This will be our protection." "You haven't opened it?" "I've tried every combination I could think of. Birthdays, anniversaries, nothing works." She dried her hands on her apron. "But maybe, would you look at it? You've had more experience with such things." She led him to a small room off the main hall, one he'd assumed was a closet. Inside was a cramped office, papers scattered on a desk, ledgers stacked haphazardly. And in the corner, a small iron safe, the kind Wells Fargo used for their coaches. Jack knelt beside it, ran his fingers over the dial. "It's good quality. Not easy to crack without experience. Can you?" "Maybe." He pressed his ear to the metal, began slowly turning the dial, listening for the tumblers. It was a skill he'd learned from a safecracker in his unit, a thief-turned-soldier who'd died at Fredericksburg. Strange how the dead kept teaching lessons to the living. It took nearly an hour, Maggie holding a lamp close so he could see, the house creaking around them in the darkness. Finally, he heard the last tumbler fall into place, and the safe opened with a soft click. Inside were stacks of money, more than Jack had seen in years, and beneath them, documents. Maggie gasped at the sight of the cash, but Jack was more interested in the papers. "These are deeds," he said, examining them. "Properties all over the territory. And this." He held up a leather journal. "This is a record of every transaction, every bribe, every murder Keynes ordered in the last 5 years." Maggie took the journal with trembling hands, flipped through it. "My God, there are judges' names here, federal marshals, even a senator. Your husband wasn't just keeping insurance against Kane. He was documenting an entire criminal network. This could destroy them all, or get us killed even faster." Jack looked at her seriously. "This changes things. We're not just threatening Kane's operation in Red Rock Gulch. We're threatening something much bigger. All the more reason to use it. All the more reason to be careful. Men have killed for far less than what's in that journal." She closed the journal, held it against her chest. "Then we'd better make sure we win." They returned everything to the safe except the journal, which Maggie hid beneath a loose floorboard in her room. The money they left untouched, blood money, she called it, and wanted no part of it. Later, as promised, Jack found her in the kitchen after the house had gone to sleep. She'd made coffee, and they sat at the small table where they'd shared breakfast that first morning. "Was it really only 4 days ago? It felt like a lifetime." "Tell me about Antietam," she said suddenly. "You mentioned it before, but tell me what really happened." Jack was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. "Why?" "Because I need to know who I'm trusting with my life. And because I think you need to tell someone." So he told her. About the morning mist over Antietam Creek, how peaceful it had looked before the killings started. About leading his men across Miller's cornfield, the stalks head high, not knowing the Confederates were waiting in the woods beyond. About the volleys that cut men down like wheat before a scythe. "We took that cornfield 3 times, he said, his voice distant. "Lost it twice. By noon, you couldn't see the ground for the bodies. Some of them were still alive, calling for water, for their mothers, for God. But we couldn't stop to help them. Orders were to keep advancing." "That's war," Maggie said softly. "No, war is strategy and tactics and supply lines. That was slaughter. And I was good at it." He met her eyes. "That's what you need to understand, Maggie. I was very good at killing. Promoted twice for valor, which is just a pretty word for efficient violence." "Is that why you left? The guilt?" "I left because I couldn't stop. Even after the war ended, I kept finding fights, bar brawls, range wars, anywhere I could use the skills they'd taught me. It took me 3 years to realize I was trying to find a battle I couldn't win, a way to join the men I'd led to their deaths. But you didn't." "No, I ran instead. Been running ever since." He reached across the table, took her hand. "Until now. I'm not worth dying for, Jack. You're worth living for. That's harder." She squeezed his hand and they sat like that for a moment, connected by more than touch. Then the moment shattered, as glass broke somewhere in the house. Jack was on his feet instantly, gun drawn. "Stay here." But Maggie was already reaching for the shotgun she kept behind the door. Like hell. They moved through the dark house together, Jack leading, Maggie covering their back. The breaking glass had come from the parlor, and they found a brick on the floor surrounded by shards. Tied to it was a piece of paper. Jack lit a lamp, read the message aloud. Last chance. Both of you gone by sunrise, or the woman burns with the house. Subtle, Maggie said, though her voice shook slightly. Kane's done being subtle. Jack moved to the broken window, peered out into the darkness. He's escalating. Then we escalate too. He turned to her, saw the determination in her face. You're sure about this? I wasn't before. But threatening to burn me alive? That's clarified things wonderfully. She set the shotgun aside, began sweeping up glass with sharp, angry movements. Richard let them use this place. Let them turn it into part of their criminal enterprise. I won't make the same mistake. This is going to get worse before it gets better. I know. She dumped the glass into a bucket, the shards ringing like bitter chimes. But at least we're fighting back. That's more than this town's done in years. They boarded up the window together, working by lamplight. As Jack hammered the last nail, Maggie said, There's a town meeting tomorrow. Every Sunday after church, people gather to discuss community business. Kane will be there. He always is. Likes to remind everyone who really runs things. Then that's where we make our stand. In church? In front of everyone. Public? Witnesses? Harder for him to just gun us down. Jack set the hammer aside. Plus there's something poetic about it, calling out the devil in God's house. You're not a religious man, are you? Lost my faith in a cornfield in Maryland. You? I still believe, Maggie said quietly. Just not sure he believes in us anymore. They finished cleaning up, and Jack walked Maggie to her room. At her door, she turned, looked up at him. In the lamplight, her eyes were dark pools he could drown in. Thank you, she said. For staying. For fighting. For... She struggled for words. For making me remember what it feels like to hope. Before he could respond, she rose on her toes and kissed his cheek, a touch so light he might have imagined it. Then she was gone, her door closing softly, leaving Jack in the hallway with the ghost of her lips on his skin and a determination burning in his chest that had nothing to do with old wars and everything to do with the one ahead. He returned to his room but didn't sleep. Instead, he sat at the window watching the street, planning for tomorrow. The town meeting would be the flashpoint, the moment when everything changed. Either they'd rally the town against Kane or they'd die trying. As dawn approached, painting the sky pink and gold, Jack saw riders approaching from the east. Not Kane's men. These rode in military formation, disciplined and alert. Federal marshals, maybe, or army. He counted 6 of them, and his pulse quickened. This could change everything, if played right. He dressed quickly, strapped on his guns, and went to wake Maggie. She answered his knock already dressed, as if she too had been unable to sleep. Riders coming, he said. Military or law enforcement, from the look of them. Her eyes widened. The Journal? No, not yet. We don't know who they are, or why they're here. Could be Kane has friends in high places. They watched from the porch as the riders entered town, and Jack's breath caught when he recognized the lead rider. Captain Samuel Morrison, his former commanding officer from the war, older now but still sitting his horse like he was born to it. What the hell was Morrison doing in Red Rock Gulch? Morrison's eyes swept the street and found Jack. Recognition flashed across his weathered face, followed by something that might have been relief. Lieutenant Hollander, Morrison called out, touching the brim of his hat. Been a long time. Captain, Jack replied carefully, though I haven't been a lieutenant in 8 years. Once a soldier, always a soldier. Morrison dismounted, his men remaining mounted but alert. Heard you might be in these parts. Also heard there's been some trouble with a fellow named Kane. News travels fast. It does when it reaches the right ears. Morrison climbed the porch steps, removed his hat politely to Maggie. Ma'am, I'm Captain Morrison, U.S. Army, retired, currently working with the Federal Marshal's Office on a special assignment. Regarding Kane, Maggie asked. Regarding a network of criminals operating throughout the territory, of which Mr. Kane is one significant part. Morrison's eyes moved between them. I understand you might have information that could help our investigation. Jack and Maggie exchanged glances. This was unexpected, potentially game-changing, but also dangerous. If Morrison was corrupt, if he was part of the network Richard had documented. We might, Jack said carefully. But first, I need to know why you're really here, Captain, and how you knew where to find me. Morrison smiled, the expression creasing his weathered face. Fair enough. Inside, perhaps? This conversation shouldn't happen on the street. They moved to the parlor, Morrison's men taking positions outside. Once seated, Morrison pulled out a telegram, handed it to Jack. 3 days ago, a schoolteacher named Thomas Garrett sent this to the federal marshal in Denver. Said a former Union officer named Jack Hollander was standing up to Elias Kane, and that if the government wanted to break Kane's network, now was the time. Jack felt a surge of respect for Thomas. The young teacher had more courage and intelligence than he'd credited. As for how I knew it was you, Morrison continued, there aren't many Jack Hollanders with your particular skill set. When I heard the description, former soldier, excellent marksman, tendency toward noble but suicidal stands, well, it had to be my old lieutenant. I'm not your lieutenant anymore. No, but you're still the same man who held the bridge at Burnside against 3 times your number. The same man who refused to fire on Confederate medical wagons even under direct orders. Morrison leaned forward. The same man who resigned his commission rather than participate in what you called sanctioned murder during the Indian campaigns. Maggie looked at Jack with surprise. He'd never mentioned that part of his past. Ancient history, Jack said. Maybe, but it tells me you're someone I can trust, and right now, trust is in short supply. Morrison looked at Maggie. Mrs. Lane, I know about your husband's involvement with Kane. I also know you've been trying to hold this place together alone for 6 months. That takes courage. Or stubbornness, Maggie replied. In my experience, they're often the same thing. Morrison pulled out another document. This is a federal warrant for Elias Kane's arrest. Multiple charges including murder, robbery, extortion, and conspiracy. Problem is, serving it might start a war. War's already started, Jack said. Kane burned the school yesterday, threatened to burn Mrs. Lane alive if we don't leave town by sunrise. Well, sun's up and we're still here. Morrison nodded grimly. Then we'd better move fast. There's a town meeting this morning? After church services, Maggie confirmed. Kane always attends, makes sure everyone sees him in the front row like he's some kind of respectable citizen. Perfect. We'll take him there, in front of everyone. Public arrest, plenty of witnesses, harder for his men to start shooting. Morrison stood. I'll need that information you mentioned, Mrs. Lane. The documentary evidence. Maggie hesitated, then retrieved the journal from its hiding place. Morrison whistled low when he saw it, flipping through pages. This is everything. Names, dates, amounts. This could bring down half the territorial government. Is that a problem? Jack asked, watching Morrison carefully. Morrison met his eyes steadily. Only for the criminals. I may be retired Army, but I took an oath to defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That didn't end when I mustered out. Church bells began to ring, calling the faithful to Sunday service. The sound was oddly beautiful in the morning air, a reminder that normal life still existed somewhere, even if it felt far from Red Rock Gulch. We should go, Morrison said. My men will position themselves around the church. When Kane shows up, we'll arrest him. Simple as that. Nothing's ever that simple with Kane, Maggie warned. No, Morrison agreed, but sometimes the simple plan is the best plan. Less to go wrong. As they prepared to leave, Jack pulled Morrison aside. Why really, Sam? Why come yourself? You could have sent deputies. Morrison was quiet for a moment. You remember my brother David? Good soldier. Died at Petersburg. No, he survived Petersburg. Came out here to start over, bought a ranch near Cheyenne. Morrison's face hardened. Kane's men killed him 2 years ago. Made it look like Indians, but I knew better. I've been hunting Kane ever since. This is personal for you. Everything's personal, Jack. We just pretend otherwise to make it easier to sleep at night. He checked his sidearm. Besides, I owed you. You saved my life at Antietam, kept me from charging into that cornfield with the first wave. Figured it was time I returned the favor. They walked to the church together, Maggie between them, looking like any group of respectable citizens attending Sunday service. The town was stirring, families emerging from houses, merchants closing shops for the Sabbath. Normal, except for the tension that seemed to thicken the air like smoke. The church was small, whitewashed, with a simple steeple topped by a wooden cross. People were already gathering, and Jack noticed how conversation stopped when they appeared. Word had spread about the ultimatum, about the sunrise deadline. Everyone was watching to see what would happen. Inside, pews were filling up. Jack spotted Thomas near the back, his face still bruised but his eyes bright with anticipation. Johansson the blacksmith was there too, taking up most of a pew by himself. Dr. Brennan sat with his wife, nervously fidgeting with his hymnal. And in the front row, like he owned the place, sat Elias Kane. He'd dressed for church, black suit making him look almost respectable except for the guns visible beneath his jacket. 6 of his men sat around him, their presence a clear threat to anyone thinking of causing trouble. Kane turned as they entered, that cold smile spreading across his face. "Mrs. Lane," he called out, voice carrying through the church. "And Mr. Hollander, glad to see you've come to your senses. Come to say goodbye to the good people of Red Rock Gulch?" "Come to worship," Maggie replied evenly, taking a seat halfway back. Jack sat beside her, Morrison on his other side. Morrison's men entered one by one, spacing themselves throughout the congregation. The service began, Reverend Mills looking nervous as he delivered a sermon about David and Goliath that felt a little too on the nose. Jack barely heard it, his attention focused on Kane, on the positions of his men, on the growing tension that made the air hard to breathe. Finally, the service ended, and Reverend Mills announced the town meeting. People shifted in their pews, but no one left. Everyone knew something was about to happen. Mayor Patterson stood, clearing his throat. "Before we discuss normal business, I believe Mr. Kane has something to say." Kane rose, turned to face the congregation. "Indeed I do. As you all know, there's been some unpleasantness lately. Outsiders coming to town, stirring up trouble, making wild accusations against respectable businessmen." "You burned the school," Thomas said, standing despite his obvious fear. "That's a serious accusation, boy. You have proof? Everyone knows—" "What everyone knows and what can be proved are different things," Kane interrupted. "But I'm not here to argue. I'm here to make an announcement. Effective immediately, I'm assuming the position of Sheriff of Red Rock Gulch." Gasps rippled through the church. Jack started to stand, but Morrison caught his arm, shook his head slightly. "Wait. You can't do that," Dr. Brennan protested. "The sheriff is appointed by the town council." "The council met in emergency session this morning," Kane said. "Mayor Patterson called the vote." It was unanimous. All eyes turned to Patterson, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "It's true," he mumbled. "For the safety of the town, we felt—" "You felt scared," Jack said, now standing despite Morrison's warning. "You all felt scared, so you're handing the town over to the very man who's been terrorizing it." "That's enough, Hollander," Kane said, his hand moving to his gun. "As sheriff, I'm placing you under arrest for disturbing the peace and inciting violence." "I don't think so." Captain Morrison stood, and his movement seemed to signal his men, who also rose, hands on weapons. "Elias Kane, I'm Captain Samuel Morrison, Special Deputy U.S. Marshal. I have a federal warrant for your arrest." The church went dead silent. Kane's eyes narrowed, flicking between Morrison and Jack. "Federal warrant? For what?" "Multiple counts of murder, robbery, extortion, conspiracy, and violation of federal interstate commerce laws." Morrison pulled out the warrant. "You can come peacefully, or we can do this the hard way." Kane laughed, that booming sound incongruous in the sacred space. 6 federal men against my 20? You sure you've thought this through, Captain?" "Have you?" Morrison asked. "You shoot federal officers in a church full of witnesses. There's nowhere in the territory you can hide. The army will come, and they won't stop until you're hanging from a rope. Maybe. But you'll be too dead to see it." The tension ratcheted up another notch. Jack could see Kane's men tensing, ready to draw. Morrison's men were equally ready. It would be a bloodbath, and innocent people would die in the crossfire. That's when Maggie stood. There's another way, she said, her voice carrying clearly. Single combat. You and Mr. Hollander. Winner takes all. Kane's eyebrows rose. What? You heard me. You've been wanting to prove you're the better man. Here's your chance. Face him one-on-one, no interference. If you win, we leave town, and the federal men leave with us. If he wins, you surrender to Captain Morrison. Maggie, no, Jack said, but she ignored him. Unless you're afraid, she continued, looking directly at Kane, unless all that strength is just for show, and you need your men to do your fighting for you. Kane's face darkened. The challenge, especially in front of everyone, was something his pride couldn't ignore. You're gambling your life on a washed-up soldier? He asked. I'm gambling on a good man against an evil one. God tends to favor those odds. Kane looked around the church, saw everyone watching, waiting. His reputation, his control, it all hinged on this moment. If he refused, he'd look weak. If he accepted, fine, he said. Right here, right now. Outside, Morrison said. This is still a church. They filed out into the morning sun, the congregation forming a circle in the dusty street. Kane removed his jacket, checked his guns. Jack did the same, trying to ignore Maggie's pale face, the fear in her eyes that she was trying to hide. You don't have to do this, Morrison said quietly. Yes, I do. Jack met his old commander's eyes. This has been coming since I rode into town. They took positions 20 paces apart. The street had gone silent except for the wind and the creaking of the church sign. Jack could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. This was familiar territory. The moment before violence, when time seemed to slow and every detail became crystal clear. He saw Kane's stance, the slight favor of his right side that suggested an old injury. Saw the sweat on the man's forehead despite the cool morning. Saw the tiny tremor in his left hand that spoke of nerves or maybe too much whiskey the night before. On 3, Mayor Patterson said, his voice shaking. 1. Jack breathed deep, let his mind empty of everything but the target. 2. Kane's hand twitched, and Jack knew he was going to draw early, on the count of 2.5, hoping to catch Jack off guard. 3. Kane moved, fast as a snake, his gun clearing leather before Patterson finished the word. But Jack was already moving too, that instinct honed by war and survival taking over. His Colt came up smooth and sure, and he fired as Kane's gun rose toward him. The shots came so close together they sounded like one. Jack felt the wind of Kane's bullet pass his ear. Kane stood for a moment looking surprised, then looked down at the spreading red stain on his white shirt. You son of a bitch, he said, then fell to his knees, his gun dropped from nerveless fingers. You actually beat me. Jack kept his gun trained on Kane as he approached. It's over, Kane. Kane laughed, blood bubbling on his lips. Over? You have no idea what you've started, soldier boy. The people I work for, they don't forgive, and they don't forget. You've killed me, but you've also killed everyone you care about. They just don't know it yet. He toppled forward into the dust, twitched once, and was still. For a moment nobody moved. Then pandemonium erupted. Some of Kane's men went for their guns, but Morrison's deputies were ready. Federal officers, Morrison shouted. Drop your weapons or face federal charges. Most of Kane's men, seeing their leader dead and facing federal authority, complied. A few tried to run but didn't get far. Within minutes, it was over. 15 years of terror ended with a single bullet and a dead man in the dust. Maggie ran to Jack, threw her arms around him. He held her tight, feeling her shake against him, smelling that lavender soap mixed with gunpowder and fear. You did it, she whispered. You actually did it. We did it, he corrected, pulling back to look at her. That challenge was brilliant, forced his hand. I couldn't watch you all kill each other in a church. She touched his face, her fingers coming away with blood. He hadn't even realized Kane's bullet had grazed him. Dr. Brennan appeared, insisted on examining the wound. Just a scratch, he declared, but you're lucky. An inch to the right. An inch to the right is a lifetime in a gunfight, Jack said. People were gathering around them now, some offering congratulations. others just staring at Kane's body like they couldn't quite believe he was really dead. The fear that had gripped the town for so long was dissipating like morning mist, leaving confusion and tentative hope in its wake. "This isn't over," Morrison said quietly, joining Jack and Maggie. Kane was right about one thing. He was part of something bigger. That journal is going to make a lot of powerful people very nervous. "Let them be nervous," Jack said. "Maybe it's their turn to be afraid for a while." Morrison studied him. "You've changed, Jack. The man I knew 8 years ago would have ridden out after this, moved on to the next town, the next fight." Jack looked at Maggie, who was organizing people to help with the arrested men, taking charge with that quiet strength he'd come to admire. "Maybe I finally found something worth staying for. Or someone." "That too." Thomas approached, grinning despite his bruised face. "We did it! We actually stood up to him and won." "The standing up was all you," Jack told him. "That telegram to Morrison was smart thinking." Thomas flushed with pride. "I figured we needed help, and when you mentioned being a soldier, I thought maybe military connections." "You figured right." Jack clapped him on the shoulder. "You're going to make a hell of a teacher, Thomas. Once we rebuild the school." "About that," Johansson rumbled, joining them. "I've been thinking. We rebuild, but bigger, better. Make it something Kane would have hated, a symbol that the town survived him." "I like that idea," Maggie said. "Richard left money in the safe. Blood money, but maybe we can wash it clean by using it for something good." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Morrison's men took the arrested outlaws to the jail, which had to be reopened and cleaned after months of disuse. The mayor, shamed by his cowardice, offered to resign, but the townspeople voted to let him stay. They'd all been cowards in their own way, after all. As evening fell, Jack found himself on the boarding house porch again, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. The broken window had been properly fixed by Johansson, who'd also repaired the bookshelf and anything else Kane's men had damaged. It was a small gesture, but significant, the town taking care of its own. Maggie joined him, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She'd changed out of her church dress into something simpler, and her hair was loose around her shoulders. In the golden light, she looked younger, the worry lines that had creased her face for months finally relaxing. "So what now?" she asked, settling beside him on the bench Morrison's men had returned to the porch. "Now we rebuild. The school, the town's spirit, everything Kane tried to destroy." "I meant what now for you?" She looked at him sideways. "The threat's gone. You could leave, find another town that needs saving." "Do you want me to leave?" She was quiet for a long moment. "No, but I don't want you to stay out of obligation either, or because you think I need protecting." Jack set down his coffee, took her hand. "Maggie, I came to Red Rock Gulch running from my past. I stayed because I found something I didn't even know I was looking for." "Which was?" "A future. A reason to stop running." He squeezed her hand gently. "You gave me that. This place gave me that." "Jack," she started, but he continued. "I know it's only been days. I know it's too fast, too sudden. But war does that. Compresses time, makes you see what really matters. And what matters to me is being here, with you, helping to build something instead of destroying it for once." Tears gathered in her eyes. "I'm not an easy woman to love, Jack Hollander. I'm stubborn and proud, and I've got more ghosts than rooms in this boarding house." "Good thing I'm comfortable with ghosts, then." She laughed, a real laugh this time, not bitter or tired, but genuinely amused. "You impossible man. That's the second time you've called me that. It bears repeating." She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "Stay then. Help me run this place. Though I should warn you, the pay is terrible and the hours are worse. But the company's good. The company is complicated. I like complicated." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The town around them was settling into evening routines, families gathering for dinner, the saloon beginning its nightly revelry, but more subdued than before, as if Kane's death had reminded everyone of mortality. "There's something else," Morrison said, appearing in the doorway. "I've been authorized to offer you a position, Jack. Deputy U.S. Marshal, working specifically on cleaning up the network Kane was part of. Jack felt Maggie tense beside him. "I'm honored, Sam, but you're done with that life," Morrison finished. "I figured as much. Had to offer, though." He smiled. "Besides, I think Red Rock Gulch needs you more than the Marshal Service does." "The town needs all the help it can get," Maggie said. "We've got a lot of healing to do." "You'll do fine," Morrison said. "Towns are like people. They're stronger than they think once someone shows them how to stand up." He tipped his hat. "I'll be leaving in the morning with the prisoners." The journal's going to cause quite a stir in Denver. "Good," Maggie said firmly. "Let it stir. Let them all worry about when justice might come calling." After Morrison left, Jack and Maggie remained on the porch until full dark, planning for the future. Practical things like hiring help for the boarding house, rebuilding the school, establishing a proper town council that wouldn't fold at the first sign of trouble. But also dreaming bigger, bringing in new businesses, maybe a newspaper, connecting to the railroad that was slowly spreading across the territory. "It won't be easy," Maggie said. "Kane's shadow will linger for a while." "Shadows fade," Jack replied. "Eventually, even the darkest ones." She stood, stretched. "I should check on dinner. The Carlyles decided to stay after all, and I promised them a celebration meal. Need help? Can you cook any better than you claimed the other day?" "No, but I'm good at following orders." "Well then, soldier boy," she said with that almost smile that was becoming more frequent, "report to the kitchen." As he followed her inside, Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in 8 years. Peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the deeper peace that came from finding where you belonged. The ghosts were still there. They always would be, but they seemed quieter now, less accusatory. The boarding house was warm with lamplight and voices. The Carlyles were in the parlor, Mrs. Carlyle playing the piano while her husband sang off-key but with enthusiasm. Thomas had returned, helping set the table, his young face bright with purpose. Even Johansson was there, having to duck through doorways, but smiling as he repaired a chair that had been wobbly since before Richard Lane died. This was community. This was home. This was worth fighting for, worth staying for, worth building a life around. The celebration dinner stretched late into the night, with even more townspeople arriving as word spread that Kane was truly dead and his men arrested. The boarding house had never held so many people, spilling out onto the porches and into the yard where someone had strung lanterns between the trees. It was as if the entire town needed to see for themselves that the nightmare was over, needed to be together to believe it was real. Jack stood in the doorway between the kitchen and dining room, watching Maggie move through the crowd with grace and warmth, accepting condolences for her husband even as people celebrated his partner's demise. The contradiction didn't seem to bother anyone. They'd all learned to live with contradictions under Kane's rule. "She's something, isn't she?" Morrison appeared at his elbow, nursing a cup of coffee while others had moved on to harder drinks. "That she is. You know this won't be the end of your troubles. Kane had partners, suppliers, buyers. Some of them won't be happy about this disruption to their business." Jack nodded. "I figured as much. But we'll handle it as it comes." "We again." Morrison smiled. "You've really decided to stay then." "Seems I have." Morrison was quiet for a moment, watching the celebration. "I never thought I'd see you settle down, Jack. After what happened with the Indian campaigns, your resignation, I thought you'd drift forever." "So did I." Jack watched Maggie laugh at something Mrs. Carlyle said, the sound bright as silver bells. "But sometimes you find something that makes you want to stop drifting. Or someone." Before Jack could respond, Thomas burst through the front door, face flushed with excitement and fear. "Riders coming! A lot of them!" The celebration stopped as if someone had thrown a switch. Men reached for guns they'd started wearing again, women gathered children, and the joy of moments before transformed into familiar terror. Jack pushed through the crowd to the porch, Morrison beside him, Maggie appearing at his other side. In the distance, lit by the full moon, a dust cloud rose from the road. Jack counted at least a dozen riders, maybe more, moving fast and purposeful toward town. "Kane's other men?" Maggie asked, voice steady despite the fear he could see in her eyes. "Possibly." Jack checked his Colt, the gesture automatic. "Everyone inside. Morrison, can your men—" already moving. Indeed, the federal deputies were taking positions, professional and calm. The riders thundered into town, and Jack recognized the lead figure even before he pulled up in front of the boarding house. Marcus Tillman, Kane's second-in-command who'd been mysteriously absent during the morning's confrontation. A cruel man with a scarred face and dead eyes, he'd always been the one Kane sent to do the wettest work. "Evening, folks," Tillman said, his voice carrying that false friendliness that preceded violence. "Heard there was a celebration. Thought we'd join in." "Celebration's over," Jack said, stepping forward, "and you're not welcome." Tillman's eyes found him, and his smile was all teeth and no warmth. "You'd be the one who killed Mr. Kane, Hollander, right? The drifter who decided to play hero." "The federal marshals have assumed control of this town," Morrison announced, moving to stand beside Jack. "Any business you had here is finished." "Federal marshals?" Tillman spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Well, that's impressive. But see, we've got business that transcends federal authority. Mr. Kane owed us money, considerable money, and since he's no longer able to pay," his gaze shifted to Maggie. "We figured his assets would cover the debt, including this establishment and everything in it." "Kane owned nothing here," Maggie said, stepping forward despite Jack's attempt to hold her back. "This boarding house is mine, legally and completely." "That's debatable. See, your husband owed Kane money, and Kane owed us money, so by the transitive property of debt, you owe us." Tillman's smile widened. "Unless you've got $15,000 hidden somewhere." The number hung in the air like a curse. It was more money than the entire town could raise, and everyone knew it. "She doesn't owe you anything," Jack said. "No? Well, that's unfortunate, because we're going to collect, one way or another." Tillman's hand moved to his gun. "Now, we can do this civilized-like. The lady comes with us, works off the debt in one of our establishments down Mexico way. Should only take, 5 or 6 years." The rage that flooded through Jack was ice-cold and familiar. "You'll have to go through me." "And me," Morrison added. "And me," Thomas said, voice shaking but determined. One by one, others stepped forward. Johansson, massive and immovable. Dr. Brennan, elderly but resolved. Even Mr. Carlyle, who had to be 70 if he was a day. The town that had cowered before Kane was standing together, perhaps for the first time. Tillman laughed. "Well, ain't that touching? The whole town playing soldier." His expression hardened. "But bullets don't care about courage, and we've got more guns than you've got heroes." "Maybe," Jack said, "but you fire one shot, and you'll have the entire U.S. Army down on you within a week. Is $15,000 worth that? You're assuming we leave witnesses." The tension ratcheted up another notch. Jack could feel it, that moment before violence, when everything balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong word, one twitchy finger, and the street would run red. That's when they heard it. More horses approaching. Lots of them. Everyone turned to see another dust cloud, this one coming from the north. Tillman's men grew nervous, hands moving to weapons. The new riders crested the hill, and Jack's heart sank. More outlaws, probably Tillman's reinforcements, but as they got closer, he saw something that made him blink in surprise. The lead rider was a woman, dressed in men's clothes but unmistakably female, with long black hair streaming behind her and a rifle across her saddle. She led at least 20 riders, all well armed and riding with the easy confidence of people who knew their business. They swept into town like a cavalry charge, surrounding Tillman's men before they could react. The woman pulled up between Tillman and the boarding house, her dark eyes taking in the scene with quick intelligence. She was perhaps 30, beautiful in a fierce way, with sun-darkened skin that suggested Apache or Mexican heritage. "Marcus Tillman," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent. "Still threatening women and calling it business?" Tillman's face went pale. "Maria Sandoval. Didn't expect to see you this far north. I go where I please." She turned in her saddle, looked at Jack and Maggie. "You would be the ones who killed Elias Kane?" "I killed him," Jack said, stepping forward. "In a fair fight." Maria studied him for a long moment, then smiled. It transformed her face, made her look younger. "Good. He was a pig who deserved a pig's death, though from what I hear, you gave him better than he deserved." You knew Kane, Maggie asked. Knew him, did business with him, despised him. Maria dismounted with fluid grace, handed her reins to one of her men. He tried to cheat me on a cattle deal last year. When I objected, he suggested I could pay in other ways. She touched a thin scar on her neck. I declined, forcefully. This ain't your business, Maria, Tillman said, but his voice lacked conviction. Everything in this territory is my business if I choose to make it so. She walked past him as if he didn't exist, approached Maggie. You are the widow Lane. I am. Your husband was more honorable than Kane, though that's a low bar to clear. He always dealt fairly with my people. Maria glanced at the boarding house. This is yours now? Yes. Good. A woman should have her own property, her own business. She turned back to Tillman. Which is why you're going to leave. Now. And you're going to forget any debts you think are owed. You can't just... Maria's gun appeared in her hand so fast Jack barely saw the draw. I can do whatever I please, Marcus. I have more men, better men, and unlike you, I'm not afraid of the Federals. In fact, she glanced at Morrison, I believe Captain Morrison and I have done business before. Morrison nodded carefully. The rustling ring out of Amarillo. You provided information that led to several arrests. And you paid well for that information. Maria holstered her gun. So what will it be, Marcus? Leave now with your men and your lives? Or shall we settle this the old-fashioned way? Tillman looked around, calculating odds. 20 of Maria's men, plus the townspeople, plus federal marshals. His dozen men were good, but not that good. This ain't over, he said finally. Oh, but it is. Maria stepped closer to him, voice dropping to a whisper that nonetheless carried. Kane is dead. His organization is finished. The smart ones will adapt, find new opportunities. The stupid ones will try to maintain the old ways and die for it. Which are you, Marcus? He glared at her for a long moment, then wheeled his horse around. Let's ride, he barked to his men. They left in a thunder of hooves and wounded pride, disappearing into the darkness as quickly as they'd come. As soon as they were gone, the tension broke. People started breathing again, some laughing with nervous relief. Maria's men remained mounted but relaxed, some lighting cigarettes or passing flasks. Why? Maggie asked Maria. Why help us? Maria smiled that transformative smile again. Several reasons. I hated Kane and anyone associated with him. I respect a woman trying to make her own way, and she looked at Jack. I appreciate a man who fights for something besides money or power. We're grateful, Jack said, but I'm guessing this isn't entirely altruistic. You're right. With Kane gone, there's a vacuum in this territory's informal economy. Someone will fill it. I'd prefer that someone be me rather than thugs like Tillman. She looked at Morrison. I run cattle, Captain. Some of them even belong to me. I don't deal in violence unless violence is dealt to me first. That makes me better than Kane, doesn't it? That's a low bar, Morrison said dryly. But it's a bar nonetheless. Maria mounted her horse again. Mrs. Lane Mr. Hollander, you'll have no more trouble from Kane's former associates. I'll see to that. In exchange, I may occasionally need to stable horses here, or have my men stay as paying guests. Is that acceptable? Maggie looked at Jack, then nodded. As long as it's legitimate business. Legitimate is such a flexible word out here. Maria grinned, but I promise, nothing that would shock a widow's sensibilities. Much. She wheeled her horse around, raised her hand, and her men formed up behind her. Oh, and Mr. Hollander? You fight well for a gringo. If you ever tire of domestic life, I could use a man with your skills. I'm done with that life, Jack said, putting his arm around Maggie. Pity. But I understand. Some things are worth more than adventure. She touched her hat brim. Vaya con Dios, amigos. May you find the peace you're looking for. They rode off into the night, leaving the town in stunned silence. Then someone started laughing, nervous, relieved laughter that spread through the crowd like wildfire. They'd faced down death twice in one day and survived both times. Inside, Maggie said, taking charge. All of you. The night air isn't good for excitement like this, and we still have food and drink. People filed back into the boarding house, the celebration resuming but more subdued now, tempered by the reminder of how close they'd come to disaster. Jack remained on the porch with Morrison, watching the empty street. "You know she's as much an outlaw as Kane was," Morrison said. "Maybe, but she's got a code which is more than Kane had. Codes are flexible things out here. Everything's flexible out here. That's what makes it dangerous. And free." Morrison studied him. "You've really changed, Jack. The rigid military man I knew would never have made a deal with someone like Maria Sandoval. The rigid military man you knew got a lot of people killed following rigid rules." Jack sighed. "I'm trying something different now. Judgment instead of rules, context instead of absolutes. That's a dangerous path. Every path is dangerous. At least this one leads somewhere I want to go." They went back inside to find the party winding down. People were making their farewells, heading home in groups for safety, even though the immediate threat had passed. Old habits died hard in Red Rock Gulch. Thomas was helping clean up, moving with the eager energy of youth despite the long day. "That was amazing. First Kane, then Tillman, and that woman. Who was she?" "Maria Sandoval," Johansson rumbled, collecting plates. "Runs cattle from Mexico to Montana, they say. Some say she's a bandit queen. Others say she's a businesswoman who doesn't let borders get in her way." "She's both," Morrison said, "and neither. And that's what makes her dangerous." "But she helped us," Thomas protested. "For her own reasons," Jack said. "Never forget that, Thomas. People like Maria Sandoval don't do anything that doesn't benefit them somehow. That's cynical. That's survival." The Carlyles were the last to leave, Mrs. Carlyle hugging Maggie tightly. "You've been so brave, dear. Your father would be proud." After they'd gone, only Jack, Maggie, Morrison, and his deputies remained. The federal men would stay the night before transporting their prisoners to Denver in the morning. "I should check the barn," Morrison said. "Make sure the prisoners are secure." "I'll go with you," Jack offered, but Morrison waved him off. "Stay with Mrs. Lane. She's had enough shocks for one day." When they were alone, Maggie sank into a chair by the fireplace, suddenly looking exhausted. The strength that had carried her through the day seemed to drain away, leaving her small and vulnerable. "It's not over, is it?" she said quietly. "There'll be others. If not Tillman, then someone else. The violence will just keep coming." Jack knelt beside her chair, took her hands. They were trembling slightly, and he rubbed them gently between his own. "Maybe. But not tonight. Tonight you're safe. The town is safe. Tomorrow, we'll deal with tomorrow." "I'm so tired, Jack. Tired of being afraid, tired of being strong, tired of fighting." "Then stop. Let me fight for a while. Let me be strong. That's what partners do. Take turns carrying the load." She looked at him with those green eyes that had captured him from the first moment. "Is that what we are? Partners? If you'll have me." "Jack Hollander, you brave, foolish, wonderful man. You've known me less than a week. Best week of my life." That surprised a laugh out of her. "You have low standards." "No, I have very specific standards. They just happen to match a green-eyed widow who runs a boarding house and stands up to outlaws." She leaned forward, rested her forehead against his. "What am I going to do with you? Keep me around? Let me help rebuild the school? Maybe let me court you properly, now that people aren't actively trying to kill us?" "Court me? How terribly old-fashioned. I'm an old-fashioned kind of man." "No," she said softly. "You're a good man trying to remember how to be good. There's a difference." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When she pulled back, there were tears in her eyes. "Stay," she whispered. "Not just tonight, not just for a while. Stay and help me build something worth having. I already promised I would. Promise me again. I need to hear it. I promise Margaret Lane to stay in Red Rock Gulch, to help you run this boarding house, to rebuild what Kane destroyed and create something better, to court you with whatever passes for propriety in a frontier town, and to never ever leave you to face your demons alone. That's a lot of promises. I'm a man of many talents. She laughed again, fuller this time. Indeed you are. A knock at the door interrupted them. Jack answered it to find a young boy, maybe 12, hat in hand and nervous. Begging your pardon, Mr. Hollander, but my pa sent me. He's Jim Baker, owns the lumber mill. He wanted you to know that he and some others are meeting at the church tomorrow morning to talk about the town, about moving forward without Kane. He'd be honored if you and Mrs. Lane would attend. We'll be there, Maggie said, appearing beside Jack. Tell your father we're grateful for the invitation. The boy scampered off, and Jack closed the door against the cooling night. They want you to lead them, Maggie said. They want us to lead them. You heard him, both of us. I'm not a leader, Jack. I'm just a woman trying to keep a roof over her head. You stood up to Kane when no one else would. You challenged him to single combat to save lives. You faced down Tillman and negotiated with Maria Sandoval. That's leadership. That's desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing. They stood together in the lamplight, and Jack could see the future spreading before them. Not easy, certainly not peaceful, but theirs to shape. The boarding house would prosper. The school would be rebuilt. The town would slowly heal from Kane's reign of terror. There would be challenges, threats, probably more violence because the frontier didn't give up its harsh ways easily, but they would face it together. I should check the rooms, Maggie said. Make sure the federal deputies have everything they need. I'll help. They worked side by side, preparing rooms, bringing fresh water and towels, the domestic routine a soothing counterpoint to the day's violence. Morrison's men were professional and polite, grateful for real beds after days on the trail. When they finally retired to the parlor, Morrison was waiting with a bottle of good whiskey he'd produced from somewhere. A toast, he said, pouring 3 glasses, to unlikely allies and new beginnings. They drank, the whiskey burning warm down Jack's throat. I'll be recommending federal protection for the town, Morrison said, at least until things stabilize. There's going to be a scramble to fill Kane's void, and I'd rather not see another tyrant rise. What about Maria Sandoval? Maggie asked. She's a known quantity. We have an understanding. She keeps the peace, doesn't raid American settlements, and we don't look too closely at her cattle operations. Morrison shrugged. It's not ideal, but it's better than chaos. The lesser evil, Jack said. The manageable evil. Sometimes that's the best we can hope for. They talked long into the night, planning for contingencies, discussing the town's future. At some point, Maggie fell asleep in her chair and Jack covered her with a blanket, struck by how young she looked in sleep, how vulnerable. You love her, Morrison observed. Is it that obvious? To someone who knows you, yes. You never were good at hiding your feelings, Jack. It's what made you a good officer. Your men always knew where they stood with you. And what made me a terrible politician. Thank God for that. Morrison stood, stretched. I should check on the men one more time. Left alone with the sleeping Maggie, Jack sat watching the fire die to embers. Through the window he could see stars wheeling overhead, the same stars he'd watched from a dozen different towns over the years. But they looked different now, less like navigation points for a drifter, and more like lights blessing a home. Maggie stirred, opened her eyes. Did I fall asleep? Just for a bit. She sat up, self-conscious. I should go to bed. It's been a very long day. The longest. She stood, paused. Jack? What you said earlier about courting me properly, did you mean it? Every word? Good. Because despite everything, despite Kane and the violence and the fear, I find myself looking forward to being courted by you. She smiled, shy and sweet. Good night, Jack. Good night, Maggie. After she'd gone, Jack remained by the dying fire, thinking about the strange turns life could take. A week ago, he'd been a nameless drifter, running from his past, seeking nothing but solitude and forgetting. Now he had a name that mattered in Red Rock Gulch, a woman who looked at him with trust and growing affection, a purpose beyond mere survival. The morning would bring new challenges. There would be that meeting at the church, decisions to be made about the town's governance, the school's rebuilding, establishing law and order without Kane's iron fist. There would likely be more threats as word spread about the power vacuum in the territory. Maria Sandoval might prove ally or enemy depending on circumstances. The federal government would want their piece of whatever order emerged. But tonight, in this boarding house that had become his anchor, Jack Hollander was exactly where he needed to be. The ghosts of Antietam still whispered in the shadows, might always whisper, but their voices were fainter now, overridden by the sounds of life. Maggie moving about upstairs, Morrison's men talking quietly in their rooms, the house itself settling into sleep with creaks and sighs that spoke of shelter and safety. He climbed the stairs to his room, paused at Maggie's door. Light still showed underneath, and he could hear her humming softly, some melody he didn't recognize but that sounded like hope. He almost knocked, almost gave in to the urge to see her once more, to reassure himself that this was all real. But there would be time for that, time for proper courting, for slow building of trust and affection into something deeper. Time to prove that he could be more than a soldier, more than a drifter, more than a man running from his ghosts. In his room, Jack stood at the window looking out over Red Rock Gulch. The town slept peacefully for perhaps the first time in years, no longer under the shadow of Elias Kane's reign. It wasn't much of a town, just a collection of buildings clustered around a dusty main street, trying to pretend it's civilization in a land that resisted such pretensions. But it was his town now, his and Maggie's and everyone else who'd finally stood up when standing up mattered. They'd earned their freedom with courage and blood, and now came the harder task of figuring out what to do with it. Jack smiled, thinking of something his old sergeant used to say, "Any fool can win a battle, Lieutenant. It takes a wise man to win the peace that follows." Tomorrow, he'd start learning how to be wise. But tonight, he simply stood at the window, keeping watch over the town that had given him purpose, the woman who'd given him hope, and the future they'd build together from the ashes of what Kane had tried to destroy. The sound of horses made him tense, hand moving to his gun, but it was just Morrison's sentries changing shift. The new guard called out a quiet, "All's well?" and his partner responded in kind. Such a simple exchange, but it meant everything. Strangers watching over strangers, civilization's small rituals asserting themselves against the darkness. All's well. Jack repeated the words to himself, tasting their truth. For the first time in 8 years, despite everything that had happened, everything that might still happen, all was indeed well. He had found his place, found his person, found his purpose. The rest would come as it would. But tonight, in a boarding house at the edge of nowhere, Jack Hollander was home. He prepared for bed, laying his guns within easy reach out of habit, but for once not expecting to need them. As sleep began to take him, he heard Maggie's door open, her footsteps in the hall. She paused outside his room, and he held his breath, wondering if she'd knock. She didn't. But he heard her whisper, so soft he might have imagined it. "Thank you." For what, she didn't say. For staying, for fighting, for caring, for giving her hope. It could have been any or all of these things. Jack smiled in the darkness, whispered back though he knew she couldn't hear. "Thank you too." Because she'd saved him just as surely as he'd saved her. She'd given him a reason to stop running, to plant his feet and fight for something worth fighting for. She'd looked at him and seen not his past but his potential, not what he'd been, but what he could become. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. The meeting at the church, Morrison's departure with the prisoners, the beginning of the long work of rebuilding. There would be setbacks and victories, new threats, and unexpected allies. The frontier didn't give up its harsh ways easily, and Red Rock Gulch had a long way to go before it could truly claim to be civilized. But civilization wasn't really about buildings or laws or proper Eastern manners. It was about people choosing to stand together against the darkness, choosing hope over fear, choosing to build rather than destroy. And in that sense, Red Rock Gulch was already more civilized than many places Jack had been. As sleep finally took him, Jack's last thought was of Maggie's green eyes in lamplight, the determination in her voice when she'd stood up to Kane, the softness of her lips when she'd kissed him. He'd come to Red Rock Gulch looking for nothing more than a bed for the night. Instead, he'd found everything. The morning came with frost on the windows and news that changed everything. Jack woke to urgent knocking on his door, Morrison's voice tight with concern. "Jack, we've got a problem. The prisoners are gone." Jack was dressed and downstairs in minutes, finding Morrison and his deputies in the barn, staring at empty cells. The locks hadn't been forced, They'd been opened with keys. Inside job, Morrison said grimly. Someone in my own ranks, or someone in town with access. Who was on watch? Jack asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Deputy Collins. He's missing too. Morrison's jaw clenched. 20 years of service, and he sells out for what? Kane's hidden money? Maggie appeared in the barn doorway, wrapped in a shawl against the morning cold. How many escaped? All of them. Every last one of Kane's men. Morrison kicked at the straw in frustration. They'll scatter to the four winds now. We'll never track them all. Or they'll regroup, Jack said quietly. Tillman's still out there. With Kane's men freed, he's got an army again. The weight of that possibility settled over them like a shroud. All their victories yesterday could be undone if Tillman returned with 30 or 40 men seeking revenge. I need to wire Denver, Morrison said. Get more men out here immediately. That'll take days, Maggie pointed out. Maybe longer if the weather turns. Then we'd better prepare for the worst. Jack looked around the barn, his mind already working through defensive positions, lines of fire. Thomas said there was a town meeting this morning. We need to tell people, get them ready. Ready for what? Morrison asked. Most of these people aren't fighters, Jack. They're shopkeepers and farmers. They fought yesterday when it mattered. Standing behind us is different from standing alone. Morrison headed for the door. But you're right. They need to know. I'll send the telegram, then meet you at the church. An hour later, the church was packed despite the early hour. Word had spread quickly about the escape, and fear had returned to faces that just yesterday had shown hope. Jack stood at the front with Maggie, looking out at the assembled townspeople, seeing their courage wavering. So we're right back where we started, someone called out. Kane's men are free, and we're defenseless. We're not defenseless, Jack said firmly. We have weapons, we have warning, and we have something we didn't have before. We know we can stand up to them. You stood up to them, Mr. Patterson corrected. You and the federal marshals. The rest of us just watched. That's not how I remember it, Maggie spoke up, her voice carrying clearly. I remember this entire town standing together when Tillman came calling. I remember Dr. Brennan stepping forward despite his age. I remember Thomas ready to fight despite being half the size of any outlaw. That was different, Dr. Brennan said. We had backup then. Federal marshals, that Sandoval woman, and her riders. And what happens next time, someone else asked, when it's just us? The question hung in the air like smoke. Jack could feel the moment slipping away, the town's brief courage evaporating like morning dew. Then Johansson stood up, his massive frame commanding attention. Then we fight, the blacksmith said simply. Like men, like Americans, like free people. Or we run and live as cowards. Choose. Easy for you to say, Foster the salesman had returned, Jack noticed, probably figuring the danger had passed. You're built like a mountain. The rest of you have hands, eyes, and triggers to pull, Johansson interrupted. I've seen boys half your size stand against Confederate charges. Stop making excuses. He's right, Thomas stood up, still bearing bruises from his encounter with Kane's men. I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of letting others decide our fate. If they come, I'm fighting. With what? Patterson asked. Good intentions? With these. Jack pulled out a key, tossed it to Thomas. The key to Kane's private arsenal, found it in his office at the saloon this morning. Enough rifles and ammunition to arm every adult in town. The mood shifted slightly. Armed resistance was different from bare-handed defiance. I can teach people to shoot, Morrison said, entering the church. My deputies and I will be staying until reinforcements arrive. We can use that time to prepare. And I can fortify the town, Johansson added. Barricades, defensive positions, make them pay for every foot of ground. You're talking about turning Red Rock Gulch into a battlefield, Mrs. Carlyle said, her voice trembling. No, Jack replied. I'm talking about making it a fortress. There's a difference. Battlefields are where people go to die. Fortresses are where they go to survive. The debate continued for another hour, but gradually the tide turned. Fear was still there, but it was being tempered by determination. Plans were made. Work parties to build defenses, training sessions for those who couldn't shoot, evacuation plans for children and elderly if things went bad. As the meeting broke up, Jack noticed a stranger sitting in the back pew, someone he hadn't seen before. A man in his 50s, well-dressed but travel-worn, with the kind of careful stillness that suggested either danger or deep thought. When their eyes met, the stranger stood and approached. "Mr. Hollander?" "My name is William Nash. I'm an attorney from Denver." He handed Jack a card. "I represent certain interests that were affected by recent events." "Kane's partners." Jack's hand moved to his gun. "Former partners," Nash corrected, "who are as happy as anyone to see him gone. Bad for business, all that violence, draws unwanted attention." "What do you want?" Nash glanced at Maggie. "Actually, I'm here to see Mrs. Lane, about her husband's estate." "My husband left nothing but debts," Maggie said coldly. "On the contrary, he left something quite valuable. Information. Documentation." Nash's eyes were shrewd, the kind that certain people would pay handsomely to acquire, or to ensure it never sees daylight. "The journal," Jack said, "among other things." Mr. Lane was remarkably thorough in his record-keeping. Names, dates, amounts, locations. A prosecutor's dream, or nightmare depending on one's position. "Are you threatening us?" Maggie asked. "Quite the opposite. I'm here to make an offer. My clients would like to purchase all documentation related to their business arrangements. They're prepared to pay $50,000. The number stunned everyone within earshot. It was more money than most people would see in a lifetime. "In exchange for what?" Jack asked. "The documents and your silence. You forget what you've learned, and my clients forget you exist. Everyone wins. Except the people Kane and your clients hurt," Maggie said. "The family's destroyed, the business is ruined." Nash shrugged. "The past is past, Mrs. Lane. This is about the future, your future. $50,000 could transform this town. Build 10 schools, bring in legitimate business, or..." He paused significantly. "You could refuse and find out how much harder life can be when powerful people consider you a threat." "Get out," Jack said quietly. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me. Get out of this church, out of this town. Tell your clients their money's no good here." Nash's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Hollander." "My clients are offering a generous, peaceful solution. The alternatives are less pleasant. We'll take our chances." Nash looked between them, shook his head. "Pride goeth before a fall, as the good book says. I'll give you 24 hours to reconsider. After that, the offer is withdrawn, and other measures will be taken." He left, his footsteps echoing in the church. Morrison, who'd been listening, whistled low. $50,000, that's a lot of money to refuse. "Blood money," Maggie said firmly. "Taking it would make us no better than Kane." "It would also make you rich and safe," Morrison pointed out. "No," Jack said. "It would make us rich and owned. Men like Nash's clients don't buy silence. They rent it. And the rent always comes due." They left the church to find the town transforming. Johansson had organized work parties, and barricades were already going up at strategic points. Women were gathering supplies, preparing medical stations. Children were being taught to reload weapons for the adults. It was grim work, but there was energy to it, purpose. "They're really going to fight," Maggie said wonderingly. "They're really going to try," Jack corrected. "Whether they'll stand when bullets start flying remains to be seen." They spent the morning helping with preparations. Jack worked with Morrison training shooters, teaching farmers and shopkeepers how to handle rifles without shooting themselves or each other. Maggie organized the women, setting up aid stations and supply caches. The boarding house became command headquarters, its position at the end of Main Street making it defensible. Around noon, a dust cloud appeared on the southern horizon. Everyone stopped working, reaching for weapons, but it was Maria Sandoval and her riders returning. She pulled up in front of the boarding house, her dark eyes taking in the fortifications with approval. "Preparing for war, I see," she said, dismounting. "Preparing for the possibility," Jack replied. "More than a possibility. Tillman's gathering men, offering big money for guns willing to hit Red Rock Gulch." She accepted a cup of water from Maggie. He's promising them Kane's hidden fortune plus whatever they can loot. How many? Morrison asked. 30, maybe 40, when he's done recruiting. You've got maybe 2 days before they arrive. Will you help? Maggie asked directly. Maria smiled. I already have. Tillman tried to recruit my men. We declined, forcefully. He's down 5 gunmen who thought they could persuade us. But you won't fight with us. This isn't my fight, Senora. I have my own people to protect. But, she paused, I won't fight against you either. And I'll make sure others know that Red Rock Gulch is under my protection after this is over. Assuming there's anything left to protect. She remounted, but before leaving looked down at Jack. That offer stands, gringo. When you tire of playing town hero, I could use someone with your skills. And my offer stands too, Jack replied. When you tire of playing outlaw queen, this town could use someone with yours. She laughed, bright and genuine. Perhaps someday we'll both surprise ourselves. Vaya con Dios, my friends, you'll need all the divine help you can get. After she left, the work continued with renewed urgency. 2 days wasn't much time. Jack found himself remembering preparations before battles in the war, that same mixture of frantic activity and terrible waiting. But this was different. These weren't soldiers preparing to fight someone else's war. These were people defending their homes, their families, their futures. As evening approached, Thomas found Jack inspecting the barricades. Mr. Hollander, there's something you should see. He led Jack to the schoolhouse ruins, where a group of children were playing in the ashes. But it wasn't random play. They were practicing formations Morrison had taught their parents, using sticks as rifles, moving with surprising discipline. They've been doing this all day, Thomas said, even the youngest ones. They want to help. Children shouldn't have to think about war. No, but these children have lived under Kane their whole lives. They know what violence looks like. At least now they're seeing people prepare to fight back instead of just accepting it. One little girl, maybe 8 years old, marched up to Jack and saluted with her stick rifle. We're ready to fight the bad men, Mr. Hollander? Jack knelt down to her level. That's very brave of you. But you know what would help even more? If you and your friends were our special scouts, watch from safe places and run messages between the adults. Can you do that? Her eyes lit up. Yes, sir. We'll be the best scouts ever. As the children ran off to share their new mission, Thomas smiled. You're good with them. I had younger siblings once, Jack said, then changed the subject before Thomas could ask what happened to them. How are the fortifications looking from the church steeple? They climbed the steeple as the sun set, giving them a commanding view of the town's defenses. Barricades blocked the 3 main approaches, with fallback positions prepared. It wasn't professional military work, but it was solid. Will it be enough? Thomas asked. Depends on how determined Tillman is. If he wants a quick raid for loot, maybe. If he wants revenge, Jack shrugged. We'll make it cost him either way. I've been thinking about what Nash said. $50,000. We could evacuate everyone, start over somewhere else. Could we? You think men like Nash's clients would just let us go? We know too much. They'd hunt us down eventually, or always be looking over our shoulders. Jack turned from the view. Sometimes the only way out is through. They climbed down to find Morrison waiting with troubling news. Just got a telegram from Denver. Those reinforcements I requested? They've been delayed. Indian troubles up north, all available men being diverted. So we're on our own. For at least a week, maybe more. Jack absorbed this, then nodded. Then we'd better make sure we're still here when they arrive. That night, Maggie hosted what might be the last normal dinner at the boarding house. The Carlyles had returned, along with Thomas and Dr. Brennan and his wife. Morrison and his remaining deputies joined them. Even Johansson squeezed himself into a chair, looking like an adult at a child's tea party. The conversation deliberately avoided tomorrow's dangers, focusing instead on memories and hopes. Mrs. Carlyle told stories of coming west as a young bride. Doctor, Brennan recalled the town's founding, when it was just 3 buildings and infinite optimism. Johansson, after several drinks, revealed he'd been a poet in Sweden before becoming a blacksmith. A poet? Maggie asked, delighted. Would you recite something? The big man blushed, but stood, and in Swedish that none of them understood, but all of them felt, recited verses that sounded like wind through pine trees and water over stones. When he finished, there wasn't a dry eye at the table. "That was beautiful," Mrs. Brennan said. "What was it about?" "Home," Johansson said simply. "A home that exists only in memory now." "Perhaps," Maggie said, "we're all building new homes to replace the ones we've lost." "Here's to new homes," Morrison raised his glass, "and the courage to defend them." They toasted, and for a moment, in the lamplight with good food and better company, it was possible to forget what was coming. But Jack noticed how everyone's eyes kept drifting to the windows, how conversation paused at every distant sound. After dinner, the guests departed to prepare for tomorrow. Morrison would sleep in the jail with his men, central to the defenses. The Carlyles went to stay with other elderly couples, planning to shelter together in the church if fighting started. Thomas helped with final preparations before bedding down in the stable. He wanted to be close to the action despite everyone's attempts to assign him safer duties. Finally, Jack and Maggie were alone, standing on the porch in the cool night air. The town was quiet but watchful, guards posted at each barricade. "I keep thinking about Nash's offer," Maggie said. "Not to accept it, but $50,000. They're that afraid of Richard's journal? Information is power, and that journal threatens a lot of powerful people. Then maybe we should use it. Not sell it, but use it. Telegraph the information to newspapers, federal prosecutors." "After," Jack said. "After we survive tomorrow. One war at a time." She leaned against him, and he put his arm around her. "Do you think we will? Survive? I think we have a better chance than anyone expects. Tillman's recruiting scum and drifters who fight for money. We're defending our homes. That matters." "You sound very sure." "I've seen both kinds of fighters. When things get bad, mercenaries run. People defending their families don't. And you? What are you defending?" Jack turned her to face him. "You. This place, the future we talked about building. We've known each other a week, Jack." 8 days now, he corrected, which made her smile. 8 days? And you're willing to die for what we might build? I'm willing to live for it. That's harder. She rose on her toes and kissed him, deeper than before, with urgency born of uncertainty about tomorrow. When they parted, both were breathing hard. "Maggie, I know. Not tonight. Not like this, with death hanging over us." She touched his face. "But when this is over, when we've won and the town is safe, and life is normal again." "Yes? Then we'll have that courtship you promised. Proper and lengthy, and probably frustrating for both of us. I can wait." "Good, because I'm worth waiting for." "I know you are." They stood together watching the stars until the night grew too cold, then reluctantly parted. Jack made one more round of the defenses, checking positions, reviewing plans with the guards. Everything was as ready as it could be. Back in his room, he cleaned his weapons one more time, wrote a letter to be sent to his sister in Ohio if things went badly, and tried to sleep. But rest wouldn't come. His mind kept running through scenarios, possibilities, the 100 things that could go wrong tomorrow. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Jack?" Maggie's voice, tentative. He opened the door to find her in a nightgown and robe, hair loose around her shoulders, holding something wrapped in cloth. "I couldn't sleep either," she said, "and I remembered something. Richard had this. Never used it, said it was bad luck, but..." She unwrapped the cloth to reveal a pistol, smaller than his Colt but well made, with ivory grips. "I thought you should have it. As backup." "Maggie, this was your husband's..." "My husband was a weak man who got himself killed. You're neither weak nor planning to die. Take it." He accepted the gun, checked its action. It was perfectly maintained, loaded, ready. "Thank you. There's something else." She pulled out a letter, sealed with wax. "If something happens to me tomorrow, give this to my sister in Boston. Her address is on the front. She doesn't know about any of this. I'd like her to hear it from me, not newspapers. Nothing's going to happen to you. Promise me anyway." "I promise." But you'll be posting that letter yourself when this is over. She smiled, sad but genuine. I hope so. She turned to go, then looked back. Jack? Whatever happens tomorrow, these 8 days, they've been worth it. You made me remember what it feels like to hope. Before he could respond, she was gone, her door closing softly. Jack stood in his doorway holding the ivory-gripped pistol, feeling its weight, understanding the trust it represented. A widow giving her husband's gun to another man. There was symbolism there that didn't need explaining. He returned to his room but gave up on sleep, instead sitting at the window watching the town. Somewhere out in the darkness, Tillman was gathering his forces. By tomorrow night, some of the people sleeping peacefully in their homes might be dead. The children practicing with stick rifles might be orphans. The town itself might be ashes. But that was tomorrow's sorrow. Tonight, Red Rock Gulch slept under stars and the watch of determined guards. Tonight, people who'd lived in fear for years rested, knowing they'd finally stood up. Tonight, a boarding house held 2 people who'd found each other against all odds and were willing to fight for the chance at something more. A sound made Jack focus. Horses, moving slow and quiet on the edge of town. He grabbed his rifle, ready to raise the alarm, but then recognized the lead rider in the moonlight. It was the boy who delivered the message earlier, Jim Baker's son, leading a group of men Jack didn't recognize. He went downstairs, met them as they reached the boarding house. What's this? Reinforcements, Mr. Hollander, the boy said proudly. Pa sent me to the mining camps. These men heard about the fight and want to help. There were 8 of them, rough-looking men with harder eyes than farmers, carrying well-used weapons. Miners, probably, or former soldiers turned prospectors. The kind of men who knew violence and weren't afraid of it. Why? Jack asked their apparent leader, a grizzled man missing 2 fingers on his left hand. Kane's men hit our camp last winter, killed 2 of our friends, took everything we dug up. The man spat tobacco juice. We've been waiting for someone to stand up to them. Figured it was time we returned the favor. We can't pay you. Didn't ask for pay. Just a chance to even the score. Jack studied them, then nodded. Welcome to Red Rock Gulch. We can use every gun we can get. He showed them to defensive positions, integrated them into the plan. 8 more fighters might not seem like much, but 8 who knew their business could make a difference. Dawn was still hours away when Jack returned to his post at the window. The town was as ready as it would ever be. They had weapons, fortifications, determination, and now unexpected allies. Would it be enough? He wouldn't know until Tillman arrived. But one thing had become clear in these 8 days. Red Rock Gulch was no longer a town of victims. It was a town of people who'd remembered how to fight back. And that, more than guns or barricades, might make all the difference. The ivory-gripped pistol sat on the table beside him, catching the lamplight. Such a small thing to represent such large trust. Jack picked it up, felt its balance. Tomorrow, he might have to use it. Tomorrow, many people might die. But tomorrow hadn't come yet. Tonight, he kept watch. Tonight, he guarded the dreams of a town that had finally found its courage, and a woman who'd taught him that some things were worth more than survival. Tonight, he prepared for war while hoping for peace. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, but Jack found comfort in their constancy. Wars came and went, tyrants rose and fell, but stars endured. And perhaps, if they were lucky and brave and stubborn enough, so would Red Rock Gulch. Perhaps, so would they all. The first shot came at dawn, shattering the kitchen window as Maggie poured coffee. Jack pulled her to the floor as glass showered the room, the coffee pot exploding against the wall. Outside, gunfire erupted from 3 directions at once. Tillman had come with the rising sun. "Stay down!" Jack grabbed his rifle, peered through the broken window. Muzzle flashes lit up the barricades as defenders returned fire. The battle for Red Rock Gulch had begun. Morrison's voice carried over the gunfire, positioning defenders, calling out targets. The miners who'd arrived in the night proved their worth immediately, their rifle fire disciplined and deadly. 2 of Tillman's men fell in the first exchange, trying to rush the eastern barricade. "The church!" Thomas burst through the back door, bleeding from a graze on his cheek. "They're trying to flank us through the cemetery." Jack cursed. He'd worried about that approach. Too many headstones for cover. "Take 5 men. Hold them there. Don't let them get behind us." Thomas nodded and ran, gathering defenders as he went. The boy who'd been terrified a week ago was commanding men under fire. War had a way of aging people fast. Maggie crawled to the cabinet, pulled out the shotgun. "Where do you need me?" "The upstairs windows. You'll have clear shots at anyone trying to reach the house." Jack caught her arm as she started to rise. "Maggie, if they break through, they won't." She kissed him quickly, fiercely. "We won't let them." She disappeared upstairs as Jack moved to the front door. Main Street had become a killing ground, Tillman's men taking cover behind overturned wagons they'd pushed ahead of them. But the barricades held, Johansson's work solid even under sustained fire. The blacksmith himself stood at the central barricade like something out of legend, a rifle in each massive hand, firing alternately with mechanical precision. Beside him, Dr. Brennan worked frantically on a wounded defender, hands steady despite the bullets whining overhead. "How many?" Jack called to Morrison. 40, maybe more. They're testing our defenses, looking for weak spots." Jack spotted Tillman himself behind an overturned freight wagon, directing his men with sharp gestures. The scarred outlaw had learned from Kane's mistakes. He was keeping back, letting others take the risks. A scream from the left drew Jack's attention. The western barricade was buckling, 3 defenders down. If it fell, Tillman's men could pour through, get behind the other positions. Jack ran toward the breach, the ivory-handled pistol in one hand, his Colt in the other. A man with a red bandana was climbing over the barricade. Jack shot him center mass, watched him tumble backward. Another appeared, and Jack fired again, the ivory pistol bucking in his hand. "Hold the line!" He reached the barricade as more defenders arrived, including 2 of the miners. Together they drove back the assault, leaving 4 more of Tillman's men dead in the dust. But the victory was temporary. Tillman had the numbers to keep pressing, wearing them down. Already Jack could see defenders running low on ammunition, despite the supplies they'd cached. And there were wounded accumulating, 5 men out of action, maybe more. The church bell began ringing, not the regular tolling, but a frantic clanging that meant trouble. Jack looked to see smoke rising from that direction. "Fire! They're burning the church!" It was a diversion, had to be, but it worked. Several defenders abandoned their positions to fight the fire, knowing the elderly and children were sheltered there. The eastern barricade thinned dangerously. That's when Tillman made his real move. A wagon loaded with hay and soaked in kerosene came rolling down Main Street, flames already licking at its edges. Behind it, a dozen men advanced, using the burning wagon as a shield. "Scatter!" Morrison shouted, but there was nowhere to go. The wagon would hit the central barricade, set it ablaze, create a gap Tillman could exploit. Jack made a decision that would have seemed insane a week ago. He ran toward the burning wagon, not away. At full sprint, he leaped onto its side, grabbed the brake lever. The mechanism was hot, burning his hands, but he held on, pulled hard. The wagon slewed sideways, tipped, crashed into the general store instead of the barricade. He rolled clear as the store erupted in flames, heard Hutchins screaming about his merchandise. But the barricade held, and the men behind the wagon were exposed. Defensive fire cut them down before they could retreat. "You crazy bastard!" Morrison grabbed Jack, pulled him to cover as Tillman's men concentrated fire on his position. "You trying to die? Trying to win!" Jack's hands were blistered, painful, but he could still shoot. He proved it by picking off an outlaw trying to climb onto the boarding house roof. The battle raged for another hour, neither side able to gain decisive advantage. The sun climbed higher, turning the street into an oven. Smoke from the burning buildings made breathing difficult. The wounded moaned for water that couldn't be safely delivered. Then Jack heard something that made his blood freeze. Maggie's scream from the boarding house. He ran without thinking, leaving cover despite the bullets that chased him. The front door was splintered, kicked in. Inside, furniture was overturned, signs of struggle. Another scream from upstairs sent him racing up the steps 3 at a time. In her room, he found Maggie backed against the wall, Nash the lawyer holding a gun on her while one of Tillman's men ransacked drawers looking for the journal. "Drop the weapons, Mr. Hollander," Nash said calmly, pressing his pistol to Maggie's temple, "or I'll paint these walls with her brains." Jack froze, calculating angles, distances. Too far, Nash's finger already on the trigger. He let his guns fall. Kick them away. Good. Nash smiled coldly. You should have taken my offer. Would have been so much cleaner. You're working with Tillman? Working with? Number. Using? Yes. He wants revenge and loot. I want that journal. Our interests align temporarily. Nash nodded to the other man. Find it. Tear this place apart if necessary. It's not here, Maggie said. Nash pressed the gun harder against her head. Then where? Somewhere you'll never find it. We'll see about that. Nash's voice remained conversational, which made it more terrifying. People always talk eventually. The only question is how much they suffer first. Jack saw Maggie's eyes flick to the dresser where the letter to her sister sat, but also where she'd hidden something else. Richard's other gun, a Derringer she'd mentioned once. 2 shots, close range only, a last resort weapon. He needed to get Nash away from her, give her space to reach it. The journal's with the federal marshals. Morrison has it. No, he doesn't. I checked. Nash sighed. This is tedious. Perhaps if I shoot Mr. Hollander in the knee? Would that loosen your tongue, Mrs. Lane? He started to turn the gun toward Jack, and that was the mistake. The moment the barrel left her temple, Maggie moved. She grabbed Nash's wrist, forced the gun up as it fired, the bullet hitting the ceiling. They struggled, but Nash was stronger, starting to force the gun back down. Jack dove for his fallen weapons, but Tillman's man was faster, kicking them away and drawing his own gun. Jack rolled aside as the man fired, felt the bullet tug at his shirt. He came up with the only weapon available, the ceramic pitcher from Maggie's washstand, and hurled it. It shattered against the man's face, sending him stumbling backward. The man fired again, wild, and Jack rushed him. They crashed into the wall, wrestling for the gun. The man was younger, stronger, but Jack had learned to fight dirty in too many back-alley brawls. He drove his knee into the man's groin, headbutted him when he doubled over, finally got control of the gun. The shot was point blank, the man's expression more surprised than pained as he collapsed. Jack spun to see Nash had forced Maggie to the floor, his gun swinging down toward her face. The ivory-handled pistol was on the floor where Jack had dropped it. He dove, grabbed it, fired without aiming, trusting instinct and providence. The bullet caught Nash in the shoulder, spinning him away from Maggie. His gun flew from nerveless fingers. Nash clutched his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. You've made a serious mistake. My employers can go to hell. Jack kept the pistol trained on him. Maggie, you hurt? No. She got shakily to her feet, retrieved the Derringer from the dresser. But Mr. Nash is about to be... Now, Mrs. Lane, Nash started, but she cut him off. Shut up. She moved to the loose floorboard, pulled out the journal. This is what you want? The record of every crime, every bribe, every murder, including the 3 federal judges your employers own? Nash's face went pale beneath his pain. You don't understand the forces you're dealing with. I understand enough. She moved to the window, held the journal up so those outside could see. Tillman! Marcus Tillman! I have what you're really after. The shooting outside slowed, stopped. Tillman's voice carried up. That's supposed to mean something to me, woman. Nash promised you Kane's hidden fortune for helping him get this journal, but Kane's fortune is already gone. Morrison found it, confiscated it. Nash played you for a fool. You're lying. Check his saddlebags. The ones he wouldn't let anyone else touch. Full of cash he was planning to run with once he had the journal. There was commotion below, angry voices. Nash tried to stand to call out, but Jack pushed him back down. After a moment, Tillman's voice rose in rage. You son of a bitch! You used us! It's not what you think, Nash called out desperately. $30,000 in these bags. You were going to let us die for nothing while you ran with the money. The shooting started again, but now it wasn't aimed at the defenders. Tillman's men had turned on the few of Nash's associates in their ranks. The alliance, fragile to begin with, shattered completely. Now's our chance, Jack said. He hauled Nash to his feet, pushed him toward the door. You're going to call off your men. Tell them to surrender. They won't listen. Then you better be persuasive. Jack pressed the pistol to Nash's spine. Move. They descended the stairs, Maggie behind them with the Derringer. Outside was chaos. Tillman's forces had fragmented, some still fighting the town, others fighting each other, some trying to flee. Morrison had rallied the defenders for a counterattack, pushing out from the barricades. Jack shoved Nash into the street. "Tell them to stop!" Nash, pale and swaying from blood loss, raised his voice. "Stand down! Everyone stand down! It's over!" Some of his men heard, hesitated. That hesitation was fatal. The defenders surged forward, overwhelming positions that had been held firmly minutes before. Tillman himself tried to rally his forces, but the miners had flanked him through the cemetery, the same route he'd tried to use earlier. The battle became a rout. Outlaws threw down weapons, raised hands, or ran for their horses. Tillman made a last stand behind the burning store, him and 5 loyal men firing desperately at advancing defenders. But Johansson had gotten behind them somehow, that massive frame appearing through the smoke like divine judgment. The blacksmith's rifle boomed once, twice. 2 men fell. The others broke and ran, leaving Tillman alone. He looked around wildly, perhaps remembering Kane's last stand, perhaps seeing his own death approaching. "Surrender!" Morrison called. "It's finished!" Tillman's scarred face twisted in rage. He raised his gun toward the boarding house, toward the window where Maggie stood, visible with the journal. One last act of spite, to kill the woman who'd exposed Nash's betrayal. 3 rifles fired simultaneously, Jack's, Morrison's, and Johansson's. Tillman jerked like a marionette with cut strings, his shot going wild, shattering a window nowhere near Maggie. He fell forward into the dust of Main Street, twitched once, and was still. The silence that followed was deafening. After hours of gunfire, screams, and chaos, the sudden quiet felt wrong, unnatural. Then someone started crying, whether from relief, grief, or exhaustion, Jack couldn't tell. Maybe all 3. "Medics!" "Doctor." Brennan's voice cut through the shock. "I need anyone who can hold a bandage." The aftermath was its own kind of battle. Wounded to tend, fires to fight, prisoners to secure. The church had been saved, the fire controlled before it could spread to where the elderly and children sheltered. 3 defenders were dead, 8 wounded, but considering they'd faced 40 attackers, it was almost miraculous. Nash required medical attention, but would live to stand trial. His employers, those shadowy figures he'd threatened them with, would have their own reckoning when the journal's contents became public. Morrison had already telegraphed its highlights to federal prosecutors in Denver and Washington. As sunset painted the damaged town gold and crimson, Jack found Maggie sitting on the boarding house porch, the journal in her lap, staring at nothing. He sat beside her, winced as his burned hands protested. "Let me see," she said, taking his hands gently, examining the blisters. "You idiot!" Jumping on a burning wagon. It worked. It was insane, but she was smiling through her tears. "Brave and insane, and exactly what you would do." "We won," he said. "It's over." "Is it?" She looked at the journal. Nash was right about one thing. We've made powerful enemies. They'll come for us. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually. Jack took the journal from her, walked to where the town was gathering in the street. Morrison was there, his deputies, Johansson, Thomas, the Carlyles, the miners, everyone who'd fought and survived. "This belongs to all of us," Jack said, holding up the journal. "The question is what we do with it." "Burn it," someone suggested. "Destroy the evidence, let sleeping dogs lie." "Publish it," Thomas countered. "Every newspaper in the territory. Let everyone know what these men did." "That's declaring war on some very powerful people," Morrison warned. "We've already won one war today," Johansson rumbled. "What's another?" They debated as darkness fell and lanterns were lit. Finally, Maggie spoke up. "Why not both?" Everyone turned to her. "We publish parts of it," she explained. "The crimes that need justice, murders, theft, extortion. But we hold back the rest, the names of the biggest players, the deepest corruption. That becomes our insurance. They leave us alone. We leave them alone." "Mutually assured destruction," Morrison said thoughtfully. "It could work." "It's not justice," Thomas protested. "No," Jack agreed, "but it's survival. And sometimes that has to be enough." They voted, and Maggie's proposal won. Morrison would take the journal, make copies, distribute them strategically. The worst criminals would face justice, but the larger network would be left with a sword hanging over its head. Behave, or the rest gets published. As the crowd dispersed to tend wounds and assess damage, Jack and Maggie returned to the boarding house. It had taken damage, broken windows, bullet holes in the walls, furniture destroyed, but it stood. Like them, battered but unbroken. "It'll take weeks to repair everything," Maggie said, surveying the damage. "We've got time now." She looked at him, those green eyes bright in the lamplight. "Do we? Have time?" "All the time in the world." "Good, because I believe someone promised me a proper courtship." Jack laughed, pulled her close despite his burned hands protesting. "That was before you saved my life by exposing Nash's betrayal. Before you stood at a window making yourself a target to give us an advantage. Before you proved you're the bravest woman I've ever known." "Does that mean the courtship is off?" "Hell no, just means I need to up my game. Can't court an ordinary woman in ordinary ways when she's extraordinary." She kissed him then, long and deep, tasting of gunpowder and hope. When they parted, she was smiling. 8 days, Jack Hollander. 8 days to go from stranger to whatever this is. "This is the beginning," he said. "Everything else was just prologue." Morrison appeared in the doorway, coughing diplomatically. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's something you should know. Those reinforcements from Denver? They'll be here in 3 days, along with a federal judge who wants to personally thank the town that stood up to Kane's network." 3 days, Maggie sighed. "The place is a wreck." "Then we'd better get to work," Thomas said, appearing with the Carlyles and several others. "This is our town. We'll rebuild it better than before." What followed was remarkable. The same people who'd cowered before Kane, who'd fought desperately against Tillman, now worked side by side to rebuild. The general store owner, despite losing his building, organized supplies. The miners who'd come to fight stayed to help rebuild. Even Maria Sandoval sent men with lumber and supplies, her way of investing in the town's future. 3 days later, when the federal troops arrived with Judge Harrison, they found Red Rock Gulch transformed. Not just repaired, but renewed. The school had been rebuilt, larger than before. The boarding house stood proud with fresh paint and new windows. Even a sheriff's office had been constructed, with Thomas Garrett temporarily appointed until proper elections could be held. Judge Harrison was a small man with sharp eyes who listened intently as Morrison presented the evidence from the journal. Nash, recovered enough to travel, was taken into federal custody along with several captured outlaws. The judge promised swift justice and ongoing federal protection for the town. "You've done something remarkable here," he told the assembled townspeople. "You've proven that ordinary citizens can stand against extraordinary evil. The whole territory will be watching Red Rock Gulch." "Let them watch," Johansson said. "They'll see free people living free." That night, the town held a dance in the rebuilt school. Fiddles and guitars appeared from nowhere, and despite exhaustion and lingering wounds, people danced. The Carlyles waltzed with surprising grace. Thomas stumbled through a reel with a young woman who'd been helping Dr. Brennan with the wounded. Even Johansson danced, carefully, with one of the widow miners who'd lost her husband to Kane's men months ago. Jack and Maggie stood outside, watching through the windows, listening to the music and laughter. "It sounds like hope," Maggie said. "It is hope. They've remembered they can fight for their lives instead of just enduring them." "And us? What are we fighting for now?" Jack turned her to face him. "The future. A life together. Maybe children someday who'll grow up in a town that stood against evil and won." "Children?" Her eyes widened. That's a big leap from courtship." "I'm done with small steps, Maggie. I drifted for 8 years, taking small steps nowhere. Now I know where I want to be, who I want to be with. I'm ready for leaps." "Jack Hollander," she said wonderingly, "are you proposing?" "I'm stating intentions. The proposal will come later, during that proper courtship you demanded. But yes, Maggie Lane, I intend to marry you. I intend to help you run that boarding house. I intend to be part of this town we've all bled for. I intend to wake up every morning for the rest of my life, grateful that my horse needed rest and I needed a room 8 days ago." She was crying now, but smiling too. "That's a lot of intentions." "I'm a man of many intentions." "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it. Yes to the courtship and the marriage and the future and the children and every impossible, wonderful thing you're promising. They kissed as the music swelled inside, as the town they'd saved celebrated its salvation. When they parted, Jack saw Morrison approaching with a telegram. "Bad news?" Jack asked. "Depends on your perspective. The Army's offering you a commission, Jack. Major, working with the federal marshals to clean up the rest of Kane's network. Good pay, prestige, a chance to finish what we started here." Jack didn't hesitate. "Thank them, but no. I've got everything I need right here." Morrison smiled. "I figured you'd say that. Had to ask, though." He handed the telegram to Jack. "This one's more interesting. From Maria Sandoval." Jack read it aloud. "The gringo and his widow have earned my respect. Their town is under my protection. Anyone who troubles them troubles me. Also, wedding gift forthcoming when appropriate. I expect an invitation." Maggie laughed. "A bandit queen at our wedding." "Our wedding?" Jack asked. "I haven't properly proposed yet." "Details," she said, waving dismissively. "We both know how this ends." "How's that?" "Happily, against all odds, against all logic, happily." They went inside to join the dancing, and the town welcomed them with cheers and raised glasses. Thomas had prepared a speech about courage and community, but got too emotional to finish it. Johansson recited another poem in Swedish, this one obviously about love based on his gestures toward Jack and Maggie. The Carlyles sang a duet that was off-key but heartfelt. As midnight approached and the celebration wound down, Jack stood with his arm around Maggie, looking at these people who'd become family in just 8 days. They'd started as strangers brought together by circumstance and danger. Now they were a community forged in fire, bonded by shared sacrifice and victory. "Was it worth it?" Maggie asked quietly. "All the violence, the death, the pain?" Jack thought about the question seriously. 3 defenders dead, others who'd carry scars forever. The town damaged, some buildings destroyed completely. The trauma that would haunt dreams for years to come. But also freedom from tyranny, justice for crimes long ignored. A town that had rediscovered its courage, and 2 lonely souls who'd found each other in the midst of chaos. "Ask me in 50 years, he said finally, when we're old and gray sitting on that porch, watching our grandchildren play in a town that's free because people were brave when it mattered." 50 years, she mused. "That's a long time to wait for an answer." "Good thing we've got time now." "All the time in the world," she agreed, echoing his earlier words. The last dancers were leaving, the school emptying out. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The town needed permanent law enforcement. The damaged buildings needed repair. The trauma of the battle needed healing. There would be disputes over property damaged in the fighting, debates over how to move forward, the 1,000 small conflicts that came with people living together. But tonight, in a school that had risen from ashes, in a town that had found its backbone, with a woman who'd shown him what worth fighting for looked like, Jack Hollander was exactly where he belonged. "Ready to go home?" Maggie asked. Home. The boarding house with its bullet holes and new windows, its memories of violence and hope, its rooms that would soon fill with new boarders drawn by the story of the town that stood up to outlaws and won. "I've been home since the moment you opened that door 8 days ago," Jack said. "Just took me a while to realize it." They walked through the quiet streets, past the barricades that would be removed tomorrow, past the graves that would be visited and honored, past the buildings that would be rebuilt stronger than before. Behind them, the school's lights went out one by one as the last celebrants headed home. Above them, stars wheeled in their eternal dance, indifferent to human struggles but somehow blessing them anyway. The same stars Jack had watched as a drifter, running from his past. Now he watched them as a man with a future, with a purpose, with a love that had bloomed unlikely as a desert rose. At the boarding house door, Maggie paused. "Jack? What you said about children earlier. Too soon to discuss." "No. I want you to know that I want that too. All of it. The whole impossible dream of a normal life after all this abnormal violence. Then we'll build it. Day by day, board by board, if necessary. Together. Together." They went inside, leaving the night to settle over Red Rock Gulch like a benediction. The town slept peacefully for the first time in years, no longer afraid of the morning, no longer cowering from tyrants. It had been tested and had not broken. Its people had been challenged and had risen to meet that challenge. And in a boarding house at the end of Main Street, two people who'd found each other in the midst of chaos prepared to build something beautiful from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Not just a life together, but a symbol of what was possible when people chose hope over fear, love over loneliness, courage over capitulation. 8 days ago, Jack Hollander had ridden into Red Rock Gulch, seeking nothing but a bed for the night. 8 days later, he'd found everything he never knew he was looking for. The drifter had become a defender, the defender had become a citizen, and the citizen had become something even more. A man with roots, with purpose, with love. The transformation was complete, but the story was just beginning.